criminals off the
Okay,
streets.
I just want to say
Defend
this,
yourselves.
Gibbs. You seem like a nice guy. I've enjoyed our conversation. The idea that criminals, just because for the virtue of being a criminal, all deserve to die is
I didn't say they
insane to
all
me.
deserve to die. I'm saying that if you're going to sit here and defend yourself, you have a moral obligation to shoot to kill. Like, let's not shoot this guy and maim him
You're
and have
saying
a terrible life for the
you
rest of
saying I have a
life.
moral obligation to shoot another human being for taking my stuff is kind of reprehensible to me.
I mean,
No,
so
what's
what's better to shoot him?
reprehensible is that you don't agree with him, right? If
Yeah,
you agree with the no, like you literally are the person that sits here and says, I do not care about fundamental human rights so long as my analysis of the consequences leads to what I believe to be the greater good. And he gives you a scenario where he says, if you do not stop this person that is a criminal, they are likely to harm and other people. And you're letting that happen because of your personal histrionics. That's bullshit.
Welcome to the all white everything that I've brought together, right? The neckbeard convention, as was told. We're going to be talking today about the Second Amendment. Is it obsolete with the rising violence in gun violence, specifically in America? School shootings at all-time highs. More and more people being gunned down in the streets. Is it time to revisit the amendment and maybe make some adjustments? I don't know, but we're come together to find out, and I brought all these wonderful individuals. Everyone doing good today? Everyone feeling loose, chipper, right? Ready to get into it?
Yeah, I'm excited, man.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we're gonna start right with you, sir. Onja, is that how you say your name?
It's Anja.
Anja. I'll do my best to remember it, but I will probably forget during this conversation, so forgive me.
It's all
Anja,
good.
go ahead. What are your thoughts? Let's hear it.
So generally, I'm very, very pro Second Amendment. I think it's important to have an armed population, um, to make sure we're safe from foreign and domestic enemies. Not that it'd be super easy for somebody to attack the United States. In fact, it'd probably be pretty difficult, obviously. But generally speaking, I just think it's good for self-defense at home, situations where you need it for self-defense out in public. And I just don't think it's a good idea or even probably feasibly possible to even implement any way to get guns out of our society.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here, and thanks for defending, our liberties, sir. We'll see if this continues as we go through our discussion. Next up, Admiral Gibbs. Go ahead.
Howdy, my name is Admiral Gibbs. I'm a variety streamer and content creator. I'm very pro 2A, and whenever I give my opening state, you'll see all the myriad reasons why.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad we're gonna get into it. Next up, another first-time guest on my show, Daedalus Media. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
Go ahead.
All right. First of all, I want to thank Wick for having me on today. My name is Daedalus Media, and I am one of the co-hosts of a new channel, Two Guys Talking History, where we cover a lot of educational and contemporary historical and social topics. And I generally tend to find the Second Amendment to be outmoded, a relic of a much different military era for the United States and for military science in general.
Okay, we'll get into it, I'm sure, during the open. Kilo, go ahead. Kilo the Giant.
Yeah, Kilo, I don't have anything to plug. I'm just a enjoyer of the conversation. I'm a self-described disillusioned liberal. I have very left-leaning ideologies that are important to me, and but I think I just have a much more measured and complicated way of kind of wanting to implement those things into our society. But naturally, my most radical position is probably on guns. I'm very anti. I'm anti Second Amendment. I have a lot of statistical and emotional reasons why, and I hope to share that with you guys today.
Okay, I'm sure you will, and this will be an interesting discussion. Pondering politics. Go ahead.
Hey everybody, I am Josiah. It's my real name, aka Pondering Politics, aka the artist formerly known as Ruminate, Destiny Orbiter, lefty, anti-Republican, anti-GOP. I think the Republican Party is the single greatest threat to the health of the United States. Also suffering from a persistent cough, so I apologize if I blow anybody's eardrums out. Um, I'm not so much anti-Second Amendment as I am a recontextualization of it, a return to the pre-Heller era, like the pre-2008 era, where we understood that the Second Amendment is not absolute, it's not unlimited, like any other right. And I think that the right of fourth graders to make it to fifth grade without being riddled with bullets is infinitely more important than the right of seditionists and people who like fantasize about overthrowing the government to hoard guns. So that's my position.
Okay, well, we'll see how this goes. Fabian Liberty, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not streaming today, but I am usually a Twitch streamer. If I'm live, I'm almost always doing a debate, doing an interview, or doing like a breakdown of a story. We don't do those like 10-hour long streams like reaction stuff. So it's come is something going on? You're pointing.
Yeah, Johnny Scarlett, thank you for the raid. 51 new people. Appreciate it. Okay, continue.
Yeah, no, thank him. Give it a second. It's fine. People know
Yeah.
who I am in this space.
Fair enough, gang. Yeah, we're gonna have a Second Amendment debate. It's gonna get spicy, so make sure you hit that follow button if you haven't already. Sit back, kick back. Scott, yeah, what's your position here? You wanna give us
Yeah,
a little TLDR before we get into it?
Yeah, I mean, I have a prepared opening statement, but I think the Second Amendment doesn't go far enough. I think that we need far more gun rights than even what any form of thought on the Second Amendment. But like I said, I have it written out. We'll get into that in the opening statement. I am an anarcho-capitalist, a libertarian, and I believe that property rights are human rights and self-defense are human rights as well. But I think it should be a fun stream. I'm not streaming right now, so you might end up with a couple of libertarians that I told to come on over here too. So you're gonna have a wild chat tonight.
I appreciate it. Mods, just again, remember, it's okay if they give ideas that we don't like. That's fine, right? Just hold them to the same standards you do everyone else. And with that, let's get into the discussion. Okay. Wow. So I guess first question to the anti-gun advocates, why do you hate freedom? And the first question to the pro-gun advocates, why do you want to kill children? And let's go with that. Let's see how it goes. What are you thinking?
So, do we not have opening statements? I apologize.
You just did.
Oh.
I think those were our opening statements.
Those were our opening statements.
Okay. I prepared like an actual opening statement. I apologize. I assumed it was like a debate where we had opening statements on what we believe, but that's fine. I can can it.
Do you want to give your opening
Go ahead.
statement?
Why don't you share it now, Scott?
Put work
Give us
into it. You
something
might
to
as well
jump
give
off
it.
of. Go ahead, brother. Why
Well,
don't you
it's
just
gonna
share
be
it now, and then we'll go from there.
It's gonna be weird if I like prepare like
Listen,
a whole page
nobody's
prepared.
gonna shame you.
I
No
got it,
one
I
will
got it,
shame
I
you.
got it, I got it.
You know what I mean? Like,
You want me to do? I'll do my prepared opening here. Much like
There you go.
Mandalorian and Star Wars, guns have taken on an almost religious significance to native Texans. And as a Texan, it is my great pleasure to defend our inalienable right to bear arms. In 1835, the president of Mexico, San Antonio de Lopez de Santillana, returned from being presidente and absentee. Upon his return, he immediately and forcefully seized power. This is not the first nor the last time he would implement a corrupt dictatorship, openly ignoring the whims of his Congress. Santa Anna was a man who would use whatever cause, liberal or conservative, to gain power and not care for ideology. Upon his return to power, he repealed the Mexican Constitution and sent Colonel Domingo de Uchater, I can't even say his name, into Texas to force the return of a cannon that the Texans had been using for defense. Before opening hostilities, Colonel Ugatetia admitted to supporting the Federalist cause of the Texans. However, despite his sympathy, he still attempted to execute his corrupt and illegal orders, proving that even good men can be forced to fight for the evils of tyranny. On October 2nd, 1835,
Okay, history lesson over. Okay, let's come
All
on.
right, well,
Come on.
here's my point: is that basically smaller countries like Ukraine, Vietnam, Afghanistan, America, Texas have all beaten larger, more powerful countries. And the first step to tyranny is basically that they're going to disarm you, and they're going to use bleeding heart causes like tragedies like mass shootings in order to push the radical left agenda.
Do you think there's any basis? Like, let me ask you this, because obviously I'm not going to straw man you. I'm sure you're anti-mass shooting, but the way you speak about it so dismissively, just out of curiosity, do you think that mass shootings are tragic and frequent enough to warrant some sort of like government response to it, or do you think it's just the cost of doing business?
I think that the gun-free zones are enabling the mass shootings to occur. So I think that yes, should be some sort of government response. Maybe we take veterans who are can pass a psych eval that are looking for jobs, and we arm them and put them in schools. I mean, maybe we hire more security in general. I don't know. There's a lot of different solutions we could talk about. But
I don't know if
disarming
that's
the
true.
populace for a few bad apples is not the solution.
No, we don't have a few bad apples. We have an insane number of bad apples. All the apples are bad.
We have more
Okay,
mass
Um,
shootings than calendar
so
years
I
in
mean, the government's made
2023.
of those bad apples, and you trust the government to come run it whenever like individual citizenry is
what am in
is
regards
bad?
to specifically solving like the gun? Okay, do you think we have a gun problem?
No.
Okay,
Interesting. So okay, well, I'm kind of confused here. So, other developed countries which don't seem to suffer from whatever gun problem that we think it exists, but you don't. Like, again, we've had more mass shootings in 2023 than calendar years. Other developed nations have a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that. So, what are they doing differently? And do you think that they're doing anything that we should aspire to?
I mean, do you consider China a developed country because they're committing mass genocide on their populace? So I mean, it depends on what you consider gun
we are
violence.
talking about mass shootings.
I mean, would you
Right.
not consider rounding up
Oh,
the Ungar Muslims a mass shooting
I
and
think it's
keeping them in freedom to
horrible.
wipe
I
them
think it's
out?
horrible, and it
Then
is
that's a mass
absolute.
shooting.
Mm.
No, I think
Yeah, that's a little bit of
it's
a red
horrible,
herring.
and it has nothing to do with what
All
we're
right,
talking about.
I have a response to this. So I
Me,
find that, personally speaking, I find that mass shootings are not necessarily 100% a gun problem as much as they are a mental health issue in the United States. We need to have better safety nets and checks for these people all around, create systems where they're able to get help. That way they're not actually like just having to go through these terrible, terrible experiences that cause them to have this warped mind that makes them lash out against the public. That's probably like more important than just taking away everybody's guns, in my
Are
okay.
opinion.
you? Can you
If
pronounce your username again for me? I'm so sorry. I want to make sure I pronounce it correct.
It's Anja.
Anja. Okay. Out of curiosity, are you conservative or Republican?
No.
Okay. So I would agree with you that there probably does need to be some sort of mental health redress here. But I guess my first question would be, do you think that the United States, given statistically speaking that we experience gun violence and mass shootings at a ludicrously disproportionate rate compared to other developed nations
So
which are less, which hang on, nations which are less powerful, less wealthy, um, do you think that we are uniquely mentally unhealthy as Americans?
so I think it's a really, really complicated issue. And when it comes to specifically your argument there, what I would say is you are correct that other nations have a way, way lower amount. But you have to understand that we're a completely different type of country than a lot of these countries that have banned guns and have had a lot of success with it. They never had the amount of guns that we have in our country currently, both registered and unregistered. And they're also not attached to a country that has an incredibly strong cartel system that brings in unregistered guns into our country. It's just a completely different scenario. I really, really hate those arguments because
half of what you just said describes the problem. You're
Right.
right.
Yeah,
They
we're
they
different
don't
because of the
have that many
problem that we
firearms.
have.
Yeah. So this is what I'm talking about when I say we have a gun problem.
okay, so
Is
I guess what I'm trying to say is how would you go about getting rid of all of the guns in the country?
Well, nobody. I'm
What
personally not proposing that. I don't even know.
what
Number one,
non-authoritarian way would you
well,
have
that's a
to
straw man
implement?
so
because I don't think anybody here on the pro gun
Well,
control
let me
side. I don't
ask,
think
does
anybody's
anyone think
proposed
we
that.
should just take the guns? Like, does anyone here think we should just
What
start
do you think
taking guns
abolishing
off
the
the
Second
street?
Amendment does?
I'm happy to make that argument, but I don't need to do it for the purposes of the conversation.
Yeah.
Do you
So
believe
I
it?
wouldn't make.
I'm not
I would.
asking what you're prepared to argue. I'm asking what you believe, my
no,
friend.
I don't think I need to.
Oh,
So
okay.
if you're gonna ask me, how do I propose taking away all the guns of the American populace? How do you propose a wide sweeping mental health focus that's going to pay immediate dividends for preventing violence
It
without
certainly wouldn't be voting Republicans into power because they oppose any initiatives to increasing
I
the
just
access and expansion of mental health.
correct,
Like, it's
but
just
I just
politically not feasible.
I don't want to make it a left or right thing necessarily. I mean, there's people on both
That's
sides
what
that
I'm here
disagree
for.
with. Okay,
I
fair
also
enough.
I also already said that I'm not right wing. So generally speaking, I think that fixing the mental health issue in the United States would be significantly easier than getting rid of guns that already completely outnumber the amount of people in the United States, and those are registered firearms.
Sure.
Um,
I
and not even including the large amount of unregistered firearms in our country. That's why I think that it's important to talk about this as far as like the logistics, because we can talk about, oh, well, maybe we should get rid of the Second Amendment.
Anja,
Maybe we should change things. What? Yeah.
I have to ask you a question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I on the one hand, you're saying it's a uniquely mental health issue,
I never said it
but
was
then
uniquely.
you said that this can be fixed by addressing mental health.
Absolutely, yeah. I think
Okay.
for the most part, yeah.
Which I'm not opposed to, like a cultural shift towards like encouraging seeking therapy and things like this. Like I'm totally on board with. I just don't think you can simultaneously say, well, this is a mental health issue, and if we solve mental health, we'll fix the problem. And then also the sentence after that say, well, those other countries that do this are not quite like America. Those countries don't have access to guns like we do. They don't have a gun-centric culture like we do. Those are kind of like it's like you're opting out of your initial stance on it by
It
saying
also
that we're different somehow.
it also seems to me,
Would
with
you argue
respect,
that we're
almost
not
like a
fundamentally different than those other
I
countries?
think we are because of the Second Amendment.
right. See, to me, Anja, it's almost like a tacit concession, like you're saying, well, the reason that we're suffering from this problem is because we made the mistake for allowing the mass
I don't think it was a
proliferation of
mistake.
guns.
No, you're putting that on to me. I don't think it was a mistake.
No, we're telling you it's a mistake.
Yeah, I believe it's a mistake. But what I'm saying is, so we agree that gun violence and mass shootings are occurring here in the United States this is a fact. This is not a matter of opinion, at a disproportionately high rate compared to other developed nations. You concede that. But you're saying that the reason that that's the case is because of something unique to the United States, which is the Second Amendment and the proliferation of guns. So what I'm saying is you're making a tacit concession there that if we hadn't allowed for the mass proliferation of guns in the first place, we wouldn't be experiencing the rate of gun violence here in the United States that we have. So if you want to make the case like there's no unringing that
Don't lead,
bell.
Venezuela leads.
Which is
So,
like
I
a
mean,
really interesting
Venezuela's
post
not a
hoc.
developed nation.
No, hold on.
What do you
We
mean they're not?
lead. Hold
Not
on.
compared
Since
to
we're not a developed nation.
Stop. I want to hear from Gibbs a little bit. He hasn't talked in a bit, so I want to hear what he's saying.
I don't know how you can sit here and say that we're sitting here talking about, oh, it's only developed nations and say Venezuela's not, or what are they, second world, not third world? I mean, it's definitely not like it's Haiti or something. Venezuela had a
You think
robust
that those are
economy.
the only two categorizations between
Well,
countries? The
hold on.
United States or Haiti?
So, like, well, you said they're not developed. So, I mean, let's just define developed. I mean, Venezuela had a robust economy until a leftist
Had.
leadership took over, and
Had.
then yeah, had. So they are developed. They were developed. I mean,
No, had
then
is past tense.
somebody took over and then
Right. Had.
implemented the gun laws, and they took away the rights of their citizenry, and now they lead the world in crime. They're number one. Caracas is the most dangerous city in the world. So everything you're saying about us leading is a bold-faced lie. And
No, I said disproportionately high compared to other developed nations.
In
That's
other
the problem.
developed countries, the U.S. is
Yeah.
blowing
So
everyone
Germany,
out of
the
the water.
United Kingdom, France, Spain.
Also, also even just the
Canada.
raw gun violence numbers were number 2.
So I mean, you're just picking developed countries that fit your narrative.
That's because
No, I mean you're free to hang your hopes on
No one-
Venezuela. That's great. I mean, I'm sure Brazil. You can go to Mexico as well. Afghanistan's another country. You can hang your hopes on them too. We're the United States of America.
Let's Fabian in.
This
Go ahead.
Yeah, this conversation is really interesting. I didn't realize it would turn into such a mid-wittery shit show so soon. But nevertheless, I guess we'll have to engage with the consequential kind of like tit for tat. We're not even mentioning studies, which I thought would be like the lowbrow shit, but we're actually going dumber than that, which is just kind of like arguing about developed nations and this and that. The problem is that the Second Amendment is an instantiation of Enlightenment philosophy by our founding fathers using, Enlightenment philosophy and the scientific method and utilitarianism, right, as a means of understanding convergence to get to deontological propositions, to get to natural law perspective, right? They didn't go far enough because the philosophy wasn't developed enough, but they recognized that there was something significant about a human right to a right to bear arms, a right to self-defense, right? Like Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence shows that he was a great admirer of John Locke when he wrote Life, Liberty, and Property, right? It was later changed to Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness because they were worried that property might incidentally justify slavery, and that was something that he wanted to do away with as an institution over time. But nevertheless, what you're talking about is we're all assuming that there is a consequentialist analysis here, that if the data can show in some regard based off of subjective analysis and studies that can't really show causality, that it is okay to get rid of human rights in the name of a presumed better, and you're comparing to other developed nations, and I would just ask you, why not just compare to America? Why not compare to America in the 1970s, where children went to school and were trained in firearms, where it was very commonplace for people to bring firearms to school, where it still is in rural America to have firearms in the back of your pickup truck. Like, if you're gonna, like, why compare to Australia or compare to, Switzerland or New Zealand? There's a couple of countries that with more gun ownership and less gun violence, right? Why do all of that? when we can just like what changed in terms of the value of the Second Amendment when we had more guns and less school shootings? Your argument just doesn't make any sense.
We have more guns
Scott,
now.
I think it's
Yeah,
kind of
there's a
funny
lot
that
more guns in the United States now. It's something on the order of estimated like.
What do you mean by more?
There's
You
also
got-
a lot more people.
I want to hear from
93.
I want to hear from
I'm
Daedalus
talking about
for a minute.
I'm talking about the prevalence of guns near schools and individuals that go to schools owning firearms. You can go into the country right now where school shootings don't occur. You can go into Kentucky, right, for example, and just go into a high school parking lot and you will find shotguns sitting on a gun rack in the school parking lot, and they don't have this issue. I'm not
Okay.
saying I magically know what the issue is, but when you posit that it must be guns and evidence is absolutely contrary to that, it's just
I
a
don't agree with
silly
that.
assertion.
I
It's
don't
kind
agree
of
with
funny
that.
because there was like a mass shooting in Louisville, Kentucky, like 2 or 3 weeks ago that got national news. Number one. Number two, I think it's funny that you cast aspersions about midwittery, but you're conflating the Declaration of Independence with the Constitution. The Declaration of
I'm not
Independence is a fine
conflating the
document.
two.
Is a fine
no.
document,
If
but
you're-
it is
no,
not the highest law of the land. The Second Amendment is enshrined in the Constitution, which is superior to the Second Amendment or to the Declaration of Independence with respect
Okay,
to law
this-
in the United
this is-
States.
listen,
Number
pause.
two.
No.
Number
If
three.
you're
Hang
gonna
on.
call
Number
out
three.
stupidity-
You said quite a
No.
bit. You said quite a bit. I'm responding.
You're,
I'm
you're
responding.
bullshitting.
So number
You're
three.
bullshitting. So I'm calling you
number
out on your
three,
bullshit.
the Second
I'm
Amendment
just going to
never
call you out on your
guarantees
bullshit.
an
I have no
individual's
problem
right
interrupting
to
you
bear
if you
arms.
just
It
make
says
up
we the
random
people.
shit to
It
subvert.
refers to, it's not. No, it's not. It's not random. The Declaration of Independence
We
and the
do
Constitution are
have
indeed
to
two
let-
separate documents.
Look, stop,
Dude,
both of
let
you,
me-
real quick. I
quick
just want to,
correction
I
on
want
this
to set this for now.
stupidity.
One
Okay.
point at a time. Make a point. Let someone respond.
I'll
Make
be
another
very
point.
quick.
Let someone respond, etc. Okay.
I'll be
Just
very
for the
I'll be
future.
very quick. I was
Quickly.
discussing the philosophy of the founding fathers. That is why I brought up the Declaration of Independence. If it went over your head, I understand a lot of people don't get philosophy, but like that's not my problem. Continue with
We
your
can talk
points.
about the philosophy of the founding fathers. I'm glad you mentioned that Thomas Jefferson was a big fan of John Locke. Do you know what John Locke's opinion on the purpose of government was? It was to preserve the unalienable rights of the people.
Yeah, John Locke was wrong about a lot of things. I call myself an anarchist, and yet Belguru, that wrote the Anarchist Manifesto that gives us the A and the O, was also a minarchist. Like the idea, I never said that these were perfect ideas. What I said is that they were the beginning of the Enlightenment, and I even said that consequentialism and utilitarianism is trash. I simply said that they were working upon an idea of convergence and working around the ideas of natural law, and we have taken consequentialism even further, and it's been subverted by the Hegelianism and dialectic process and Marxism,
don't you
etc.
think that's
and gone
essentially what we're
further from
talking
that
about here?
process.
Scott, don't you think that's essentially what the conversation is about, though? We're essentially deciding between the lesser of two evils. You're essentially
There's no
trying
such
to
thing as a
decide-
lesser of two evils. It's a non.
I mean, I
That's
think
a
it's pretty clear
that's a
what the
silly
lesser of
statement.
two evils is.
I want to
No,
get.
that-
What do you mean?
something either
All
is evil or
all
it
evil
isn't.
is equal. That's philosophy.
I
You didn't know that?
want to give space to Daedalus, who's been patient and haven't heard from him much. Daedalus, go ahead. I do have a question for the panel, maybe to get us on a single track here. We'll see. But Daedalus, go ahead, and then I'll ask my question, and then we'll see what happens. Right.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important to lay out that if you're going to look into the philosophy of the founding fathers, you're going to want to look at other documents apart from the Declaration. The intentions of the founding fathers laid out by Alexander Hamilton pretty clearly in the Federalist Papers, Federalist 29, that he has an intention of establishing a militia separate from a standing army. So
Mhm.
the
They would
intention
use the
behind
term
this,
the regulars. Yeah.
yeah, the intention behind the Second Amendment is largely to give that power to the states to establish and regulate a militia as opposed to holding a standing army, which is largely irrelevant now, I think, because we have a permanent standing army. We've had one since the 70s in the close of the Vietnam
Well,
War.
For the
It
record,
was also
for the
in
record, the term
opposition of a
regulate-
potential standing army, but
for the record, well regulated means well organized with a hierarchical structure. It does not mean government regulation. That's a modern
It
understanding of
absolutely
language.
means government regulation. That's
Yes,
absolutely
no.
Hamilton's intention.
Wick, I'm curious to know what you think your question is to get us on a single track here.
The way
Well,
you
hang on. I'm sorry.
We're
can
all
I
over the
just-
place.
Can I just say with respect to
Backhanded.
the? Can I just say with respect to the well-regulated part, the well-regulated part to? I'm sorry. Who's the gentleman there in the green shirt?
Daedalus.
Daedalus,
Daedalus. He's right on the money because even It's illegal to have a paramilitary organization in the United States. Paramilitary organizations are outlawed in all 50 states. The Supreme Court's held since the 1880s that, like in Illinois state law, I think it was Illinois v. Presser, that an Illinois law prohibiting a paramilitary force was absolutely correct. So it was referring to government regulation, not just the ability of citizens to just arbitrarily organize in defiance of the state.
Yeah,
So
it's
So
very
hold on, pause.
explicit.
If the
Very
Supreme
explicit.
Court, hold on, if the Supreme Court says something is right, do you A, believe that it is morally right, no matter what it is that the Supreme Court says? And two, do you believe that it is always constitutionally right? Because somehow I think the overturning of Roe v. Wade, you would magically no longer think of SCOTUS as this beautiful institution that always gets it right in terms of philosophy, constitution, morality, etc. Like I think it's I understand the idea that it is illegal, but the idea that you're appealing to the authority of SCOTUS and therefore their interpretation must be correct. Well, then you must believe that Roe v. Wade should have been overturned, correct?
I never gave any indication whatsoever about the moral judgment here. I'm simply saying that it's the final arbiter of what is or is not constitution. What is or is not constitutional. It is simply a matter of constitutional reality that until the 2008 Heller decision, we understood that the Second Amendment referred to a militia as a government-regulated body of citizens, that it didn't guarantee individuals the right to bear arms.
It's a nice pivot to my question.
Women weren't allowed to carry guns. Black people weren't allowed to carry guns. It didn't guarantee the right of every citizen. We keep guns away from minors, from felons. This is not a blanket wide guarantee.
He's asking you if you think that's the way it should be.
Do you want to answer my question though?
He's asking you what your opinion on that is.
Of whether or not it's the right thing morally that citizens are not guaranteed the right to bear arms.
It's a very simple question. It was very simple. I said you used the idea that SCOTUS said something, therefore that is the authority on what is and isn't constitutional, right?
It is.
That was what backed up your argument that something is or isn't constitutional based off of the opinions of SCOTUS. I simply said, that's interesting for someone that seems to be such a big lefty. Do you agree that if that is the logic that you're putting forward, then must it always be true, or is it only true in this instance because it agrees with your histrionics?
The Supreme Court is always the final arbiter of what is or is not constitutional, even when I disagree with it.
We're talking about whether a constitutional amendment should exist in its current format right now. We're not talking about whether something is constitutional or not.
No, I'm aware. It's just
stop.
I'm telling Josiah.
This is a good time for me to kind of insert my question because I think it plays into this, right? Regardless of the legality, the constitutionality, what the founding fathers did or did not intend, I don't, we can discuss that. But more importantly, do we think that owning a firearm is or should be a fundamental right that everyone has? And if you think there are exceptions, what exceptions would you put on this, if any? I'm very curious. What do you think, Ann?
When you say fundamental right, I think of no. It makes me think of things that I consider to be natural and unalienable. Okay, so when you say fundamental right, as kind of there's language in the Constitution about this, especially in the preamble. There's a right to the pursuit of happiness. There's a right to, I have it here, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense as per the government. Those are the unalienable rights of the people. I don't really understand how owning a firearm falls under that category.
So you would say no is the answer.
My answer is definitely no. Yeah,
not a fundamental right.
Not to attack my own flank, but I'm curious here. Do you not believe that the right to self-defense is fundamental?
Self-defense, yeah, but your right to self-defense is not exclusive to the ownership of a firearm.
But my question would be just given the what's the word I want to look for? Force multiplier, I guess the level of technology now, given that much violence is conducted with firearms, do you think that the inalienable right to self-defense allows at least some guarantee, at least for some firearms?
I believe that the removal of firearms and the removal of the Second Amendment would mitigate the risk of assault from a firearm. I think it would be less of a concern.
Fair enough.
Okay. What about the rest of you? Do you believe that? Do you think if we got rid of all the guns, it'd make people safe?
No. It's almost virtually impossible, by the way.
I don't
Hang on.
Okay, I also
which
I
was-
think
which is-
addressing I don't like the subtext of like it's almost impossible, because then we dive into this rabbit hole conversation about how you'd implement this policy, and that's not what we're here to determine. You can't say I think it'd be almost impossible, but also we should fix mental health. Those things are
Well,
both seemingly impossible in
Is
today's
that okay?
society.
So is that not an important distinction to make? Where if you want to have this conversation at all, because I feel like if your position is you want to get rid of the Second Amendment, you want to get rid of all the guns, then you probably need to have an actual functional reason, like of how you're going to do that. What is that
I'm just-
form going to take?
Well, first of all, buyback programs have worked in the past, but beyond that, I'm not here to argue the practical implementation of it. I'm here to argue the philosophy of it. We're here to determine whether the Second Amendment is obsolete or not. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the subsequent like legislation. I'm talking about how do we feel about this? How do we feel about gun ownership and the Second Amendment? That's what I'm here to talk about.
Yeah, I don't think an unlimited right to firearms is going to make people safe. We have an enormous amount of firearms in the country already, and it hasn't made people safe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I mean, as I guess I'll just round it out as the pro gun control side. I don't know if I support the abolition of the Second Amendment because I'm also considering the practical implications, and it's not just a philosophical question to me. But I do believe, like any other right, including your right to speech. Yeah, I mean, hell, in this environment, in this world, your right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are all limited and all constrained by the government. And I think that the same thing applies with the Second Amendment. And then you've got to go
Agreed.
by a policy, a case by case, policy by policy basis. So I'm not committing to the abolition of the Second Amendment. But I do think that it is like any other right; it deserves to be heavily constrained, especially when you consider the negative consequences.
Just say a Whick asked you if you
So-
consider it to be a fundamental right.
So what I would say is, everyone should read Lysander Spooner's Constitution of No Authority, because at the end of the day, the Constitution is just a piece of paper and an idea that a bunch of people presumably subscribe to, though obviously there are individuals on this panel that don't believe in it. That being said, I'm one of those people, right? I don't think the Second Amendment goes far enough because it is indeed a fundamental right. I don't know that I would use the terms fundamental in the way that I would describe it. I would say that property rights and the right to freedom from aggression, negative rights, unlike the positive rights that are being put forward right now as a means to try and curtail your actual rights, is more than just fundamental. It's an objective fact that is grounded in starting in existence exists, then Aristotelian logic, moving on to the law of non-contradiction in that regard, and then performative contradictions. I think it can be absolutely proven that it is quite impossible to logically argue for aggression against people's persons and property without engaging in a performance, as Habermas would put it. So it is more than just a fundamental right. It is an objective fact of logic that aggressing and using power and violence against people's property and ability to defend themselves is a violation of natural law, and thus you are stopped from me not committing violence against you and imprisoning you until you recant those absurd obsessions.
I wanna
Scott,
give
that was
Anja
intense.
some-
Would it be fair to say, just so I want to make sure I understand
After
correctly,
you, Anja, though. After you,
that-
Anja, go ahead.
that you support the Second Amendment, you don't think it goes far enough. You're not saying it's fundamental because you view it more as just a necessary means to an end to protect life and property. Is that fair to say? Is that what you mean?
No, I would say that property itself, which is the firearm, right? Because we're kind of like almost like reifying gun violence into the material reality of the gun itself. Not to borrow from like Lukács and the fucking commies that they are, but it's a good term, so fuck it, I'll use it, right? Like we're putting this idea of gun violence onto an inanimate object, right? And so the inanimate object itself is property, and I have a right to my property, no matter what I do with it, so long as that isn't aggressing upon another person, right? There is something to be said, however, about the inherent threat of lifting a gun, right? So when I point a gun at you, I'm aggressing upon you because I'm showing and engaging this threat towards you. The same could be said about, let's say, a nuclear facility in the area. If you non-voluntarily build a nuclear power plant next door and it could blow up, that's kind of a threat to my home, right? So there is some argumentation that one could make about the inherent threat of bringing guns into certain spaces and your choice, right? But you can't really make that threat on public property like public schools because the existence of public property is already a violation of human rights.
Anja, go ahead before we get into that and go down that rabbit hole. Anja, please.
This conversation is a little bit frustrating for me on all sides because I feel like we're talking about philosophical and ideological ideas while simultaneously talking about real world material consequences as examples, but we're not willing to actually grapple with the entire picture, and we're just kind of talking about ideas right now. Ideas are great, but unless you have actual implementation, actual real world like real world action that you can put into the world for it, I don't really see what is the point of having conversations like this unless it's the entire full scope. I'm somebody who does a lot of sociological research. I am also a political scientist. So personally, I read philosophy. I enjoy it as like a practitioner perspective, but I am not like someone who bases all of my entire ideas behind like philosophical thought.
Okay, Anja, let me ask you this.
That's not
directly.
true. The philosophy speaks through you.
First of all, let me ask before anyone else goes, I have a question because you made an interesting statement and I'm curious. So say we did have a relatively safe, effective way to get rid of most of the guns, for the government to come and safely and effectively get rid of most of the guns in the United States. Say we had that mechanism in place today, and all we had to do was decide whether it was right to implement this method or not. If we had this method, would you be okay with it? So I guess what I'm trying to ask with this question is your opposition to this simply because you don't think it can happen, or because you have a philosophical kind of ethical saying, well, no, even if it could happen, I would still think it's wrong because I think it's wrong to take people's guns.
My philosophical issue with this conversation is that I do feel personally that it should be a right to defend yourself. Now, if there was no guns in the United States, there wouldn't be any need to defend yourself with a gun. You could learn martial arts. You could learn ways to protect yourself with your own hands.
Wait. Like that would just mean that women are fucked. Like,
right?
Handicapped people are
guns
fucked.
are a pretty bad issue
right?
for women to begin with.
Like, I mean, like, look, if you don't have a gun, if guns have done more to equalize, I think, a lot of things. Like, because if you were handicapped, if you were like in a wheelchair, for example, right?
Okay, wait.
You aren't going to beat anyone up. Your gun is your only choice.
I just have to establish something. Does everyone here on the panel agree that I just hope there's no disagreements, because to proceed in this conversation, I think we all have to agree on this. Are guns the most efficient, accessible, and easiest way to inflict harm and death upon other creatures or human beings that we have available to us? No.
What do you mean by we have available to us? Like that exists in the world,
Yeah,
or that like I can
aside-
easily go to the store and purchase?
That you as a citizen have access to.
Knives, Walmart, go to the store, get a knife, stab something.
You
That's-
think that knives are a more efficient and better tool for inflicting harm and murder than a gun is?
I mean, you listen. Up until the nuclear bomb, the battle that killed the most people.
I want you to say that you think a knife is a better tool for inflicting murder than a firearm is.
I'm saying that it's more efficient and easier with ease of access by what you defined earlier.
You
Knives
think
are substantially easier to get. I don't have to go do any background check to go buy a knife set from Walmart. I don't have you like.
I'm talking about.
It's common
I'm
sense,
talking.
bro.
I'm talking about. Okay, we have a relatively accessible gun culture right now. As it stands right now, most places it's not that difficult to acquire a firearm. Obviously, this varies by state and by locale, but generally this is true. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Given
I'm not
that
going to fight you on
knives are
this.
also
The most pro-gun person here. Yes, guns are
yes. Okay.
probably
Great.
the easily of the things you can easily get there, the greatest force
Yes.
multiplier.
Okay. Great. So
Force
all things
multiplier.
equal in terms of accessibility and availability, do you think that guns are the preeminent choice for someone who wants to inflict harm or murder on another person?
Yes.
In the United States, yes.
And
I mean,
anywhere
I
in the
don't-
world, really.
What do you mean by preeminent? I mean, it's an individual, like you're like, if we're trying to generalize, I would say probably for most people, right? Like, I mean, some people are probably more likely going to, I don't know, run someone over with a car. You know what I mean? Like, but I
mean,
get what you're
even
saying.
by his own thing, he's wrong because if we look at Rwanda, they were over here wiping people out with machetes. I mean, and that was in the 20th century. So, I mean, you're sitting here saying this when we're just
Whoa,
ignoring
whoa,
what's
whoa,
the
whoa,
easiest way, which is
Admiral
to deny.
Gibbs, Admiral Gibbs, the
This
is pretty
UK
bad.
Rwanda
has a
again is not a
solution for
related
this.
event.
Okay, we're
What do you
gonna
mean
get
it's
rid
not
of
a
your
related
kitchen
event?
knives.
Gun violence.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing that in the UK. I mean,
Oh.
they're literally going after the gun knives in the UK.
Okay, look,
Admiral, I'm
why are
confused.
we fighting about this? Like,
I mean,
I don't
obviously,
know.
if you have a choice between a gun and a knife, you're taking the gun in almost every situation. Sure, not every. You can look at corner cases, right, where like they're just coming up at you, like really close combat situations. But if someone's breaking into my home, I don't reach for the knife, do I?
Admiral, come on. What does Mando use? Mando uses blasters, doesn't he? He's not pulling out a lightsaber, baby. I think so. What's I'm so sorry. Is it Kilo?
Kilo,
So
yes,
Kilo,
sir.
can you?
Have you
Force
not
multiplier,
heard of the
sure.
dark saber? What the fuck, my guy?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
okay.
I just wanna-
Spoiler alert for season 3. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, chill.
Yeah.
I
Kilo,
just want
can
to
you go
round
ahead
out.
though?
I'm trying to round out what I'm getting at here because
I will admit
we-
the force multiplier aspect, if that's what you're asking me to do. Yeah,
well, of
sure.
course, and to be honest with you guys, I have to some earlier parts of the conversation. I kind of want to walk away from. I don't really like making it about
Can I
mass
answer your
shootings.
last question though, Wick, before we continue move on to the next thing about the self defense aspect? I just want to say
Sure.
that like if you're like y'all mentioned the women, you kind of stole my point from me that I was going to make was about the women. You know, like I'm a 300-pound former college wrestler. If I grab somebody, specifically a woman or even most men, they're not going to get away without a weapon of some kind if I'm trying to cause them bodily harm.
Okay,
So if we're sitting there taking away their
Okay,
weapon,
okay,
Calm
Muhammad
down,
Ali.
Steven Crowder.
Can I
guys,
round
I'm
this
not a
out?
Muhammad Ali guy. I'm just saying, like, just even if I was just a fat, super fat dude, I'm just talking and fall
Wick,
over. They're gonna have a
I'm
bad
gonna round
time.
this out. I'm gonna round this out very briefly. If
Is
you
that a fat
replace
joke?
every,
That's fucked up, man.
I'm gonna robust this out really briefly. So if you remove all of the firearms in America and you just snap your fingers Thanos style and they're gone overnight, and you replace them with a knife, do you think that our murder rate would stay the same, increase, or decrease?
I would probably increase. It'd be hard to know though.
Our
you're
murder
try-
rate would increase if all of the guns were gone and we only had access to knives and machetes and shit. The murder rate would increase,
Yeah, well,
Scott.
so your specific analogy, where we're like, and we're kind of thinking in fantasy land. Nobody knows, right? Like to claim that you know would be absurd.
Oh, I have a pretty good
right?
idea. No, I do.
Ye-
Go ahead.
Well, but probably not. But what I would surmise, right? If I'm using my imagination crystal ball style, all the guns magically gone the next day. What I would say is you would probably have the many of the South American cartels would grow in extreme power as they found a market void to sell guns back into the states. Unless we had an incredibly authoritarian southern border control system that went along with this. So we would fund the cartels massively. You couldn't get rid of all of the guns because the cops, presumably, you don't want to get rid of all
It's
the
a
cops' guns.
hypothetical.
Maybe you
I'm
do.
trying to establish the
yeah, no,
preference for
no.
firearms as murder weapons.
Right. You asked the hypothetical. I'm going to engage with the hypothetical. Don't get mad when I engage with the hypothetical.
No.
and it
I'm not.
shows
I
the
appreciate you
problems in the
engaging,
hypothetical.
Scott. I
Right, like,
appreciate
so,
you
like, what I
engaging, but
would
the purpose
say-
of the hypothetical is that guns are not part of the equation for us.
So-
You're
so what I
introducing
would-
all
what
these
I
other
would say-
variables.
What I would say is that there's no reason to believe that people that want to murder would not use knives if they want to murder an
Yes,
individual.
there is.
Right.
Yes, there is.
Well, I think the UK begs to differ because their crime rate increased after getting rid of their guns. That being said, I do not believe that that's anything other than a historical fact, right? I believe that there are other factors in play always, and that this idea that we can scientifically determine causality, that the guns is what increased the crime, is silly. I think only public health experts that do bullshit ideological studies try and do that crap, right? But that being
I
said,
thought you wanted to talk
it
about
is a
studies. Can I
historical
not use
fact.
those?
I mean, you can use them. I just don't
Oh,
care.
you froze.
Even
you said
if crime,
to yell at you when you froze, so I'm yelling at you when you froze.
yeah,
Okay.
even if the crime rate doubled, I wouldn't give a fuck because it's a violation of liberty, right? Like I don't care about the consequential analysis. What I would say is that there are a multitude of other factors. In the example where you get rid of guns, I think the cartel would gain a lot of power. I think criminals very quickly would have access to firearms and citizens wouldn't. And criminals would have carte blanche because you're saying, hey, the best way to defend your home is with a firearm. And at the same time, even though there's data that shows that like baseball bats might be better, some people suck at using guns. Defensive violence statistics are all over the place. Nevertheless, if you believe that it's the best force multiplier, well, and criminals believe as such, well, then criminals now know that, well, I've got guns and most of these other people don't have guns, so I'm going to fucking use them. I think you'd probably see an emboldening of crime and a strengthening of the cartel, and the response would have to be a more authoritarian police state in order to deal with that crime specifically, which means cracking down on low socioeconomic status neighborhoods, more gang violence, more lost opportunities for poor and middle class in America. And I think what you would see is problems abound. Yeah.
I mean, let's just take what he's saying and go further with it. Like, look at stuff that we've
You've
already put
already
into
stretched the
practice.
scope of my hypothetical far beyond what I was trying to introduce.
Well,
But if you want to go further, go ahead.
I just want to use one point. Like, we sit here and talk about the good guy with a gun, bad guy, whatever. But I'm saying let's just look at something we've already implemented, which is like the war on drugs. That failed abysmally. We have more drugs than ever before. We cracked down on it. How are guns going to be any different? It's just
It's
going to be one organization providing a service that people want, one way or the other, and people want the
Yeah, dude.
guns.
The ATF is super popular,
Well,
especially
I
with
want to
puppies.
hear an answer to that. I want to hear an answer to that. I want to hear an answer from.
I
the
didn't get an answer to my
anti-gun
question, but that's
side.
fine. We can proceed.
You just said I gave you too much of an answer to your question.
No. You twisted the scope, the parameters of what I was trying to ask you. You started
You asked
introducing
me,
me where
do
the
I
other
think
guns come
crime-
from and all this kind
You
of shit.
said, do I think crime would increase or decrease if
I
we
asked
snapped our
you-
fingers and got rid of all of the
Scott.
guns in America? I said I think it would increase, and then I
Scott.
explained why.
Let
The
me
fuck
rephrase.
are you talking about?
Let me rephrase for you. If I snap my fingers and guns were never invented, they didn't exist. Do you think our murder rate would increase or decrease?
That's like that would change the entire history of the world in such a degree that I literally could not answer that question.
It's just the same thing that just happened, where you're expanding the scope of the hypothetical. I'm
Yeah,
talking
and I
about
said- and
the
I said it's a-
efficiency
the
and preference for.
hypothetical.
Okay,
This is
Yeah,
gonna.
it's
This
a
isn't gonna
bullshit
go anywhere.
hypothetical.
This I promise you. Okay, hypothetical's over.
World War
Hypothetical
I,
time gone.
World War
Okay.
II, Vietnam, all of these wars drastically just changed in history or may not have happened. I don't fucking know. I still don't know what the situation that I gave. You said, what do you think would happen? So if I thought guns were never invented, I think a similar, different type of weapon that is a force multiplier likely would have been created because there is a market need and a desire from people to have powerful weapons to use
Replace
both in
them with a
war,
knife.
aggression, etc.
for the purposes of what I'm asking you, replace them with a knife. No ray guns exist.
Okay, so in your hypothetical, we did not create anything more substantially violent than knives, or with the capacity as a force multiplier to commit violence than knives. What I would say then is that in order for that to have occurred, the psychology of humans would have had to have been so fundamentally different
Yeah,
in their
okay, it was.
desires
It
that
was
it would
different.
totally change the world.
Yeah, that's what happened in the hypothetical. Yes.
Well,
How far do you want to take this? I mean, like, are we an alien species now? Like,
All right,
I mean,
I'm-
I don't know.
Wick,
We all
we can
sing
move on,
fucking
that's fine.
kumbaya. Like, I
Thank
don't
We
you.
can
know.
move on. Wick.
Okay.
Anja, I agree with you, buddy.
Go on,
Like,
one
I'm
more.
not a philosopher by trade either. Like, I got my degree in political science as well. Like, I'm more interested in looking at not only the constitutionality of things, but also like the practical application of potential law. That's why, like, again, like some of these things I don't have a concrete answer for and don't pretend to. Like, to me, it's not a question of Second Amendment abolition because number one, it's just not feasible in the first place. I think that we could probably impose more stringent gun control measures in an
Can you give
attempt
us
to address
some
gun
examples
violence.
of that? Just real quick, to speak of the
Sure.
practical, what do you think are some practical gun control restrictions that you would advocate for today that you think we could, at least in some states and maybe more anti-gun states, that you think you could pass and you think would be good?
So a lot of these
Maybe
would
give
have
us
to come.
one and then we can deal with it, right?
So background checks would be good. Universal background checks, if it could be imposed at a federal level, would be nice. Potentially red flag laws. But here's the thing. Here, let me just clarify here. So part of the
Background
problem
checks?
is.
Give a real
Hang
answer,
on
my
one
guy.
second. So part of
red flag laws, they don't get enforced.
so part of the problem is that a lot of the research, like that, we have huge gaps in research in terms of the efficacy of gun control because of the Dickey Amendment, which was passed in 1996, which basically forbade the CDC from doing comprehensive research into the successes or failures of gun control. And it's basically been imposed for the past 20-something years. So to me, like what I personally use, I defer to, I don't know if you're familiar with the RAND Corporation. They're they're a nonprofit. They're an NGO that does like the biggest analysis that I'm aware of. in terms of the efficacy of gun control laws. And they're brutally honest. They're like, listen, there's some evidence to indicate that some gun control measures, again, like red flag laws or background checks, would curtail or reduce some types of gun violence
Please,
and not others.
Okay, let's put a pin in this, right?
Right.
And first of all, Fondue for $5 says, "Who is dying to guns specifically? If the majority are criminals, why blame that on guns?"
The
The
majority
majority
of
is the criminals.
suicides.
The majority is
Majority of
suicides.
suicide. Yeah.
Okay, fair
54%.
enough. But to let's just address to the pro Second Amendment folks in the room.
Yeah.
Do you have problems with the proposal he just gave? Red flag laws and background checks were the two. And if you do, what are those problems? And let's talk about it. Let's discuss it.
Yeah.
What
So
is
first
wrong
with
with the
background checks, there's nothing per se wrong with. I mean, like obviously I'm an anarchist, so like I don't like the government instituting anything. But assuming putting on my like chud hat, right, and just being like a standard Republican, right, for a moment. Like the problem with background check laws is that they just don't fucking work. Like there's almost like the Obama administration suspended like reporting the data on background checks because they had like I think it was something like 70, 80,000. I don't have the exact number available to me. Like incidences of like the background system going off. And then what ended up occurring was that they had like less than a dozen cases brought. And then it was in the single digits in terms of convictions. The fact of the matter is criminals with criminal records aren't retarded. Like I know like we think they're dumb because they're criminals. And in many ways they are, but they're not like, they're at least as smart as Forrest Gump, and they don't buy a fucking gun where you have to go get a background check. They just go buy it off the streets where they're widely available. So it's just like you would, if you're going to say background checks, then you'd have to come up with a more draconian background check. And then once we start getting into that, what do those infringements look like? All of a sudden you start to find problems, right? So people will use the term background checks because it sounds common sense, but really it doesn't really do anything. It's a non-answer that is just kind of touted out for like along party lines. So that would be my issue with background checks. The what was the second
red flag laws.
Red
Well,
flag.
first of all, let's stick to
Yeah.
stick to the background check first. Let's before we go off too far, right? Let's stick to the
Yeah,
background check.
I was just trying to answer both, but that's fine. Go
I
ahead.
understand, but I want to deal with this one at a time because otherwise it gets lost in the sauce a little bit. So background checks, gang. For those of you who are for it, why is Scott wrong here?
Can I piggyback off that before you all go on? 'Cause
Briefly,
listen,
yes.
So I actually don't have a problem with background checks as a conservative for the same reason I think we need voter ID law. I would like to know who is buying what, and if they're buying guns. Let's say that you have the thing. I want to make sure you're not a felon. Cool. Let's background check them. If you're gonna go vote, make them have an ID. Make sure they're not a dead person. It's real simple to me, but it seems like people have some real hypocritical views on those kind of things when it comes to one thing or the other. It just turns into ideology. And so in the end, I say, no, if we're not going to have one, then we shouldn't have the other. So let's just have no background checks for anybody.
I lost all my guns. I clearly don't own guns in case any glowies are listening.
Noted. Okay. Those of you pro background check here, explain why.
Generally speaking, I would say that I'm pro background check.
Okay, please.
There are plenty of places in the United States that do attempt to do background checks when they sell people guns. Obviously, we don't have a super great system for that in place right now. Currently, my issue is I think background checks can help, and I think red flag laws get a little complicated though too as well. But we can talk about that later. Background checks can help, but I think it is important to recognize that, like I said before, the amount of unregulated guns on the street out there are just way, way more than you would even think, and gives so many people ease of access to these firearms that even if there was background checks, even if there was a database that you could have easily accessible, you would just still never know. It's impossible.
Do you think? I guess I don't think anybody here, in terms of, again, like practical application, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I know I certainly would not commit to the idea that any sort of gun control measure would be a panacea. So like even the practical application or practical issues that you just identified. But do you think that the government, I guess, has a vested interest in making a good faith effort? Could you at least agree with the logic of gun control measures? You concede that they might work, even though that they would not work perfectly. but do you think that there's enough justification to pursue it anyway? Because that's what I think. I think government has an interest to at least attempt to address issues with gun violence in this country, even if the research is mixed, even if it may not be perfectly applied or completely eliminate the problem. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Of course, yeah. You're never going to be 100% for sure about any sort of legislation that you're bringing up. I think it is important and the role of the government to make decisions like that. But
That's some. I mean, that's something. I mean, because I'm not going to challenge you
Do you
on
think
the
they
idea
would?
that it would be.
Let me ask you this. I almost called you ruminate. Pondering politics.
Sir.
Do you think background checks would be effective?
Yeah, I think again. So here's the
Why? Why do you think they'd be effective?
because
Like, 'cause they just
there are some
okay.
studies that
Go ahead.
indicate as much. So we know, or at least this was the case, that a large majority of gun owners in this
Okay,
country.
you're skipping something. So like, I get it that some studies say they might be, but why do they say this? What do they point to as a reason that they're effective? Does that make sense? We can skip the studies say part. We could just say why they're effective, right?
Because a large majority of gun owners purchase their firearms from like licensed dealers and whatnot, so that's typically the main avenue by which people purchase guns, and that if there were enforced background checks on a federal level, then it would just, I mean, logically, it seems like it would catch more people. It would trip people in terms of like I don't know what the term is, but basically people who would breach who would violate the background checks, like who would trip the background alerts if the vast majority of people are not getting their guns from back alley dealers or whatnot. So it seems like that would be the most effective way to do it.
Wait, do y'all think
That
that
makes no
lawful
s-
gun
that
owners are like committing the most crimes? Because if they're following the law and whatnot, I would say generally those are probably not the guys going and committing gun crime.
I'm sorry,
right.
could you repeat that? You cut out on me.
I'm saying I don't think that the lawful gun owners are the ones committing the most gun crime. I mean, we talk about mass shootings and whatnot, but if you look at mass shootings from like a gang violence perspective and include anybody that's been a shooting of three, criminals drastically uptick as opposed to random mental health incidents like
You don't
that
think?
cause these mass shootings.
Well, I said that like the vast majority of gun owners purchase their guns from licensed dealers, not that they don't go on to become
No,
criminals later on.
Just to
Like,
be clear, I
the easy
consider
ones
the
following those laws
I want to
do it.
answer your question, Gibbs. So I consider the mass shooting data a little bit less compelling than just the raw like handgun suicide homicide rates. But just for the purposes of the conversation, the 10 deadliest U.S. shootings of the past decade all involve legally purchased guns. I think that this is somewhat of a trend. Sorry, my camera keeps freezing. I think there's somewhat of a trend. I don't have hard numbers on it. It just seems like it's routinely in the news that this firearm used for this crime was purchased legally. Um,
Yeah, but the
so
problem with that is that like you're talking about an extreme outlier when you're talking about mass shootings, right? Like
I agree
unless
with you.
you're
I
unless you're
yeah.
including gang violence, and if you look at gang violence, right, then the majority of them are committed by illegally purchased handguns, right? So you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either you put gang violence into the data, right, and then when you do that, what you're going to find is that a majority of crime and a majority of gun violence is committed by not law-abiding citizens that go and buy stores where background checks aren't changing anything, and also where background checks aren't changing anything in this regard either, because a majority of those crimes are committed with illegally purchased firearms, so they wouldn't have been caught by a background check. What my original point about the background check isn't like from a consequentialist perspective, right? Which I just think you're wrong for trying to violate human rights and take away guns regardless of whatever fucking data you bring. But if I step into your area, right, where we do a tit for tat on what I think will reduce violence and crystal ball and say we can take away people's human rights because we think it will be better. If I step into that arena, the problem is that the way background checks are currently implemented, mostly what they do is stop legal Black people and Latinos from being able to purchase firearms because they're so shitty that they go mostly by similar names or the same name. And the overwhelming majority of people that get stopped from purchasing a firearm via background check are people that have the same name as a criminal. And usually when people have the same name as a criminal, they tend to live in areas with higher crime. So as of right now, background checks are trash. If you want to implement them from your perspective, you're going to have to be more draconian, which means you're going to have to, at the very least, change it from like similar sounding names into the same way that you get a background check when you apply for a job, which means we're tracking your social security, we're tracking your employment history, we're tracking, what crime you may have committed in every single state. And it's going to be more draconian. And that's when you start getting into the area where, at the very least, the family values consequentialists, also known as Republicans, right? Because they're not fucking tradcons, because they're not fucking deontologists. But nevertheless, the family values consequentialists are going to start getting mad when you're tracking all of that fucking information just to purchase firearms.
Why is it a problem that the government tracks if you committed crimes in other states? Right? Like, I mean, if you went and did terrible, terrible things in Ohio, wouldn't it be good if they knew that in Florida?
The existence of the government is a problem. Nevertheless,
Yeah,
the
you're asking the
would
wrong
be-
person, Wick.
Oh,
Right, but the problem.
my bad.
I'm I'm just giving examples of how extensive it is when you get a background check for an employment, right? And how they're different than the background checks that are done when people purchase firearms. And there used to be. I don't understand why it's so bad, right? Like I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that. It appears to me that there were individual players and NGOs and people that gather data that liked the idea of 70,000 purchases being stopped and how amazing background checks are, except they're just not effective as they are. So when we say background checks, I'm not per se against background checks when I step into your arena of pragmatism. What I'm saying is just saying that phrase is kind of silly because the current ones do nothing.
Yeah.
Well, this is why I'm trying to dig down on the thing. But go ahead, Kilo.
Well, I just wanted to say, I don't mean to throw Pondering under the bus here because he's on my side. But background checks, I'm not super passionate about. I don't think there's I don't have these numbers on hand. I have some numbers, but I don't have background check numbers.
Well, same question to you then, Kilo. Same question to you then, Kilo. To ask Pondering there. What practical laws or restrictions would you place today? Would you advocate that states or the federal government implement today that would reduce guns on the streets?
Removing them, stopping the production, the distribution, the resale, all of it. But so that's where I'm coming at this from.
I mean, that's your ideal goal, but do you think these are practical solutions?
No. This is a very idealist argument.
What practical solution would you advocate for? I see you, Daedalus. We're good to get to
Wait, to clarify, I'm confused. Did you say that would reduce guns or gun violence? I thought you said
one.
guns. Okay.
I think removing guns removes the gun violence. I only really care about the gun violence. Practical steps, things that I think we can implement today are capital investment in impoverished areas, a reinforced allocation of funds towards education, infrastructure. Places that struggle with violent crime are often places that are just not as well off, obviously.
So neither of those involve taking guns?
You're asking? No, I want to take all the guns. You're asking me what the most practical approach to this is.
Okay, fair enough. Daedalus, give me the answer. You heard the question.
Background checks are not really going to be effective. What you want is waiting periods, because the biggest problem you have with gun-related injuries is suicides. And waiting periods and keeping people from having access to a lethal means of ending their life is going to make it much easier to get them help, get people out of crisis. If they don't immediately have something to hand, they're not going to usually, by what we see research, they're not going to usually go on to something else.
Do you have a waiting period in mind? Are we talking a week, 2 weeks, a month? What are we talking here?
I would say something on the order of maybe 3 weeks to a month. It gives you plenty of time. You still have access to people who want to purchase weapons can eventually get those weapons, and you still have this kind of period.
Can I throw these out there and then you tell me what you all think about this? Because I found.
Well, hold on to that thought. I do want to let you, but I'm curious to the pro Second Amendment side. Waiting periods. Does that seem like if there were no background checks, no other things, and you just had to wait a month to get your gun, would that be acceptable?
That violates property rights, doesn't it, Scott?
Yeah, it violates property rights. But even from a pragmatic perspective, the only thing you're going to reduce with that is suicidality.
That's very compelling.
That's a significant chunk.
Very compelling.
Well, I think people have a right to commit suicide, but I'll set that one aside. If they want to commit suicide, I don't think I have a right to intervene to stop them from doing so, if that's their choice. I think it's a bad one. But nevertheless, I think talking about gun violence and then adding suicide into the equation, it's an entirely separate issue. That's just the means by which one does it.
That's the most important component of it.
Why is that the most important component of it? Because it inflates your numbers for the conversation?
I think it actually gives him a
Those
good point because that comes into the mental health question.
Right.
No,
So
that's fine. I never said I didn't want to address mental health.
Okay.
That's fine.
what I
There's
would
the
say in
raw.
terms
Go
of
ahead.
what I would say in terms of crime, right? In terms of gang violence, waiting periods aren't going to stop them from getting guns because they're already buying them illegally. And in terms of mass shootings, I mean, these people are usually writing, are often writing manifestos in Discord servers with retired FBI agents. I don't know that, a 3-week waiting period when they're looking at the 17 different firearms that they want to use is actually going to do anything other than make them change their schedule before they shoot
Let's
up.
say-
So I'm trying to figure out what the usage of it is, other than
definitely
denying
think
rights and saying we're doing something.
So the consequence of the significance of denying rights, compared to a potential meager decrease in at least some suicides, maybe homicides. How do you weigh those two things?
I mean, I want to jump in here and say that it comes back to Benjamin Franklin saying, those that prefer security over freedom or give up their freedoms for security deserve neither. I mean, that's kind of what we got going on here. We're gonna make the wait somebody get their legally owned weapon.
I don't agree with that.
I hate to call out my side, but if you look further into that, he's talking
you wanna
about
read that
public
quote a little more.
education and taxes, and he's basically arguing for government intervention. It's a
Yeah,
weird
that's an
case.
Benjamin Franklin is explicitly making an argument for intervention at that point. He's talking about the Penn family not paying taxes for the common defense of the colony of Pennsylvania. That's very different than it's commonly used.
Yeah, I'd say he's wrong, and I'd say the quote by itself is based, but nevertheless, I'd be careful with that one because a smart lefty will call you out. Luckily, I'm here to give it to you with the soft gloves.
So I just sent a link out to the group chat, and I was wondering what you all might make of this because again, so I telegraphed it earlier. This is the source that I tend to refer to the most when I discuss Second Amendment related issues, which is relatively rare, which is the Rand Corporation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what they've done. As far as I can tell, it's the most comprehensive and most brutally honest in terms of aggregating the data while acknowledging all all of the issues with it. They're very forthcoming. There's so many flaws in the research because, again, a large part due to the Dickey Amendment. But some of the proposals that they say, based on the available data, the various studies over the years, when they refer to gun policies that may decrease certain outcomes like violent crime, unintentional death and injury, suicide, mass shootings, some of the things that they say with moderate evidence, I'll just throw these out there. Background checks, so that's why I referred to that. Prohibitions associated with domestic violence. So, again, if you have a record or a charge or a conviction for domestic violence, being kept away from guns, child access and prevention laws, waiting periods, minimum age requirements, are the pro Second Amendment side. Are any of you receptive to that? And even on my side, because I know we've all been going back and forth. We had Scott kind of take a shot at his side. I know Kilo, you and I have had some disagreements. What do we think about any of these proposals in terms of their efficacy?
There's one in terms of their efficacy that I think, because I've looked at the Rand's research before.
Before you get into that, what do you think of Rand? Just out of curiosity, do you think they're full of shit, or do you in terms of comprehensiveness? Do you find them credible?
I think I'm less worried about the credibility of an institution and more so just looking at an individual piece of research and their methodology. Do I think they're lying in what they report? No. Do I think that every scientist always has, and every peer-reviewed study always has blind spots? Yes.
Sure.
But
okay, fair enough. I'm sorry.
On
so
to
go
the
ahead.
efficacy. There is one thing that they are correct on from a pure efficacy standpoint, right? Which is domestic violence. And the reason I would say that the evidence is pretty strong on that is because individuals that commit domestic violence are not your typical criminal, right? They're not in a gang. They're not robbing people out of desperation, right? What you have is a kind of a third degree murder kind of similar situation that you're attempting to prevent, these crimes of passion, right? So you have people that can, for the most part, function in society without engaging in criminal behavior, but for whatever reason lose it or lose their control or their narcissism or whatever. There's a lot of, I don't want to, my background's in psychology, so I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but so I want to keep it like layman, but basically,
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that.
Basically, you're dealing with people that the issue is a control issue, and while that is typical of criminals in general, it's not their day-to-day life. And so these people aren't likely to just simply go to the black market in the ghetto and like try and find somebody to buy guns out of a trunk, because they don't have those connections. That's not the life that they live, etc. And so I do think, even though I'm against it from a property rights perspective, and I think that there are other better ways that the market can fix this, I do think that that is an obviously efficacious way to stop domestic violence murders via firearms. That being said, I don't know that they wouldn't just stab a bitch.
On that note, not the stabbing a bitch note, but on the note of efficacy and things. So first thing, gang, if you like this kind of content, if you're hungry for the political content rather than the drama content, you got to make it worth my while, right? You got to incentivize me with the market forces, right, to continue to cover this kind of stuff rather than jump into the drama side of things. So get those subs, get those bits, all those things really helps me out. YouTube
and I'll
side,
point
like
out
and
there, if
subscribe.
with donations and everything, Scott is being very generous. He told us in private that he will vote for President Biden in 2024 if we get Wick to a certain subscriber level.
Why you gotta lie like that?
Isn't that right, Scott? Come on, Scott.
Why
Come
you gotta
on.
lie? But
So
let's
I mean,
let's do this.
so the accelerationist in me almost wants to agree with you, because if there's anything I could do to destroy the country faster, it would definitely be to vote for Biden.
Let me get back to the discussion at hand. I want to switch tacks just a small bit, and I want to ask the pro Second Amendment side, if not guns, right? What is your solution to the rise of gun violence in America? Or do you think it's simply the cost of doing business, right? That, we just got to protect these rights, and if a bunch of kids die, that's unfortunate, but rights are more important.
We don't have to say a
what are
bunch
our
of kids die.
solutions here?
Kids,
I would give two solutions. I would give two
just
solutions.
to be clear, really quick, Scott. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, go ahead.
The conversations surrounding mass shootings and things like that, I know that there's a lot of pro-2A people that just fucking cringe whenever it gets mentioned in these conversations. We don't have to talk about those things. I don't have to phrase it as, well, what about all the dead kids? We know that that is a fraction of the problem that we're trying to address here. We can just say gun-related deaths, gun-related
I'll
violence,
say it
gun-related
however I like
suicides.
on my show.
I'm just saying it feels disingenuous to me. I'm not arguing from that perspective.
So
Temperance Kill for $5 says, I'm a little disappointed that you don't have a woman on the panel, LOL. None of them volunteered. I asked for people to show up, right? And I put out a tweet saying, come on my show. I didn't get a single
That
response.
person is making many presumptions here.
Oh,
I don't think
anyway,
we've all gendered ourselves.
Solutions. Carry on.
So solution number one, you all are going to think it's a meme, so I'm just going to move on very quickly from it. The first thing you should do is abolish public schools and institute actually giving that money back to people, because depending on where you live in America, the average amount of money that is spent on a school-age child is somewhere between $11,000 to $25,000 per year per school-age child. So I mean, like someone living in New York City with 3 kids, maybe $75,000 in their bank account might really allow them a better education experience than New York City public schools. That being said, no one's going to accept that because, good men, plant seeds for trees of which the shade they will never sit in. So a more pragmatic, immediate solution. I would say, number one, additional options in schools. I wouldn't say school choice so much, but allowing people to divest from public school and public education and have that money given to them to go somewhere else. What the hell? So the other thing that I would say is, what I would do is, magic wand. I know it's a stated solution, but it is one nevertheless. I would reduce the workload that guidance counselors are currently dealing with in terms of trying to funnel kids into college and trying to do administrative work that should be done by other school officials. And I would institute that every report card period, every single student has a mandatory session where they're taken out of class. And it's just your time, and you just go to the guidance counselor. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You just have to have a meeting like 2 to 4 times a year with those and all throughout the country. The reason I would do this is because I think a lot we talk about the stigma of mental health, and I think there's a lot of conversations about crazy or about like how these people are insane or all these other things, when really most mental health is about training parents, recognizing problems, catching them before they become an issue. And I don't want to normalize, and make cool mental health disorders. What I would rather do is normalize that everyone just goes to the guidance counselor because they do, and no one gets made fun of or bullied because that's just normal that every kid goes to the guidance counselor, and therefore every kid has an opportunity to speak to somebody about whatever may be an issue,
And
both
I want to hear
in crime-ridden areas or, the mass shooting kids.
I want to hear responses to that, but first, 2 things. $5 from Fondue to ask, what about defensive use of firearms? How do they stack with gun deaths? And I'm curious, but there's a second question here. And this is how they phrased it. Okay, don't get mad at me. Ask that lib in the center, if he is so apt to restrict the rights of free Americans, yet is driven by the most impactful policy possible, and is willing to restrict these rights before the actions of others, why doesn't he just ban Okay. Nope. I got through half of this. I don't think I can finish it. Yeah. Why don't just
Was
ban?
Kilo the lib in the center? It could.
Yeah.
I was about to say I don't think that
Was this addressed to me?
To the lib in the center. That's you, I believe. Ruminate.
Oh, no, that's
It's
wait,
not
that's
ruminate.
Josiah.
Pondering politics.
Pondering. Yeah.
Pondering's in my center.
Am I in the center? I thought
You are in
on
the
my
center.
screen. I'm on the.
my screen. You're in the center.
That's you.
Oh. Okay. Well, can you finish the question so I know what
Sure.
I'm answering?
Why doesn't he just ban Black Americans from owning firearms to solve half the murder? It's sound, valid, and consistent with the logic he has displayed so far, and doesn't seem to believe that rights are deontological. So be consistent.
So if I'm just interested in efficacy, why don't I just ban Black Americans?
Yes.
What I would say, and I kind of got into this on Twitter with somebody earlier, they made the point about men, since men disproportionately commit crime. I would say that that is an unnecessary step, right? So society is created for by people, men, Black people, and others, and we don't need to try to take the aggressive step to remove them from society when we can take the smaller step.
This is not a
to try to
serious
address
question.
guns.
You don't have to dignify this with an answer. That's not a
Yeah,
serious
this is
question.
a-
There's no way.
Well, okay.
How is it
fair
not
enough.
a
Hey, why
serious
don't? Hey,
question?
wait, hold on. Because why don't? In the interest, if we're just talking about efficacy, why don't we just remove all the people? If there's no people here, then no one will get killed. That's completely ridiculous. Like, don't even dignify that with an answer.
No. It's literally what happens when you don't actually have any sound philosophical axioms that you go off of. What he's doing is he's highlighting your consequentialist framework, that so long as it works for the greater good. It's no different than the scenario where someone talks about a child being abused in a basement, and you learn at the age of 18 that your perfect utopia exists only because of this. Would you be willing to live in the utopia based off of that? It's just another thought experiment. I mean, you could go a step further if you really want to go about it. If we're so concerned about suicides, then we should just ban trans people from having firearms, because trans people are the ones that have such an insanely high suicide rate.
I want my channel to still
There's no
exist.
TLS
after
violation
today.
there.
Okay, I just
You might be okay on that. Wick, I don't know.
I
Dude,
don't.
I don't know.
I
think we should probably
do D-trans and
triage our
trans interviews all
responses.
the time. I know
I
where the
think we should
TLS
probably-
line
Let's
is on
get
that.
let's get to the first question that was asked. What about defensive use of firearms? How do they stack with gun deaths? What are we thinking?
I'm trying to find numbers, but it's kind of nebulous.
You're frozen.
That's one of those things that is blocked pretty substantially research-wise. So you have a lot of cases, a whole lot of cases. The only real numbers I was able to find prior to this was the FBI's database on officer-involved shootings, and that makes only about 5% of gun deaths in total.
I think the other
they're
stat you
not-
look up is wrongful death cases, because a lot of times self-defense gets sued. Other civil court cases.
Yeah,
wrongful death.
there's not a whole lot of very ironclad numbers there.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll ask then. So Fabian Scott gave us 2 solutions that he had. For those of you also on his side in this debate, ostensibly. Um, do you agree with those solutions? Are there other solutions you would put forward? Like, what is the answer to the rise in gun violence in America?
I mean, I'm going to sit
If
here
not
and
gun control. If not gun control, then what?
well, I'm going to take what you said in the original question when you asked it, which is, or is that the price of doing business? And I'm going to say yes. It is the price of doing business, and I mean, I think it's a fundamental right that is necessary. We were talking about the regulated militia earlier. Part of the regulated militia back in the day was the Minutemen. The whole idea was they could be ready in a minute. That means they were average citizens that were ready and had weapons at hand, like to defend themselves. The purpose of the guns is for the government to fear its populace, so that they don't project these bad things onto us. So for me to sit here and go, okay, yeah, these are bad things. These are bad things that are happening to people. But unfortunately, that's not the reason we have the guns. The reason we have the guns and we need the guns is to defend ourselves from tyrannical government and from criminals.
But what's your base? So that's where I'm confused. Like, what's your basis for that? Where is it your interpretation that the Second Amendment is to protect citizens from a tyrannical government or to afford citizens the ability to overthrow a tyrannical government?
The Texas Revolution, I mean, like right there, like I'm sixth generation. We've been here since the
Well,
Revolution. We got our
Are you
history.
saying
how do
that it's a
you
moral right or it's a constitutional right? This is where I get confused because a lot of
Both.
conservatives and Second Amendment, it's not a constitutional right. The Constitution forbids overthrowing the government, like in like half a dozen places, like treason, sedition, rebellion. They're expressly forbidden, and actually it empowers the government to suppress rebellions, insurrections, and sedition. So that's where I'm confused. Like the if at least Scott, I'll say this for Scott, we disagree fundamentally, but he claims that the right of citizens to overthrow the government or to repel tyranny is a moral or natural right. He would never make the claim that it's constitutionally enshrined. I assume. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Scott,
No.
but. So the Constitution doesn't allow for it. The supreme law of the lands, to whatever extent you believe that the Constitution is, it doesn't allow for that. It doesn't empower citizens to overthrow the government. It's a myth.
Okay,
It
I think
expressly
you're.
forbids it.
I think the truth is somewhere in between both of your
Yeah.
statements. Actually, what I would say is that yes, you are correct that the Constitution is designed to give the state the power to have a monopoly on on certain aspects of the economy, on a republic, that it can suppress these revolutions, etc. But I would also say that ingrained in the philosophy of the writings of the founding fathers, part of the reason that the Second Amendment is there is so that if the government becomes overly tyrannical, that the populace does have the capacity and is not neutered from doing it. I mean, Thomas Jefferson's like one of his most famous quotes ever, right? Is that like the tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants alike, that it's its natural manure, right? The idea being that like, yeah, you should have guns, and if tyrants were to overthrow this or make this government such an imposing figure that it became tyrannical, or they were to violate that constitution. Because I think if you brought any of the founding fathers here today and said, is this what you envision for the power and scope of the state? They would be like, why haven't you started killing these people? Right. So I think the truth is probably a little in between.
I mean, and I would also want to go on the record saying, yeah, they set this up as a formation of government. Obviously, they have to have some provisions, so not every Joe Blow off the street can just go, "Hey, I'm president," and start shooting people. You know, but they also, if you look at it, you mentioned Thomas Jefferson. Another quote from Thomas Jefferson, sometimes it's attributed to Sam Adams and Thomas Paine, is that when the government fears the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny, and that's kind of where I'm at on this. If we start taking away the ability for the citizenry to defend themselves because we want security in our day-to-day lives, then we're not going to have security whenever the government comes in and implements, some kind of draconian policy that's evil.
so
I'm,
much of this conversation
go
has
ahead.
surrounded practicality and practical implementation of the solutions that are being
Yeah,
presented. What do you think the practical component of you standing up against the government against tyranny looks like?
Afghanistan looks like
I think
the
Afghanistan's
world's
a bad
most
example.
powerful. No, I think it's the world's most powerful military attempting to control a country, and people with limited weaponry and resources being able to hold off for 20 years. I mean, Alexander the Great
No. I'm
himself
not asking
had
you.
said, right, like that there are only a couple of things you should fear, and the Lion of Afghanistan is one of them, right? I
I'm
think
asking you.
Mhm.
So, from a moral standpoint, I understand where you're coming from, right? Like you want to preserve that right by all means. I totally get that. I'm asking you what you think the scenario looks like where you are being tasked with standing up to the federal government and the U.S. Armed Forces. How do you see
So
there
so
being value in you being able to
so
fight in that situation?
so you know
That's
how like
not.
sometimes conservatives will make the argument that like the death penalty is a deterrent, and then we'll have these arguments, and eventually we come to realize that the data shows that 25 years in prison or above, like really, there's no added determinant.
Right.
Like right, but
Diminishing
sorry,
returns, yes.
right, there's diminishing
Deterrence.
returns.
Yeah.
Deterrence. I don't know why I kept saying determinant. I apologize, but regardless, right? Um, it's a deterrent, right? When you have an well-armed population, it doesn't matter whether or not the state, right? Once it brings out 100,000 fucking soldiers into an area and their advanced weaponry, whether or not they have the capacity to take it over. What matters is that there is tons of bad press. There's tons of economic downturn. The individuals that run it are afraid of losing their jobs, being voted out. There's the international community. There are all of these different things, right? That an armed population is more likely to put up some form of meaningful resistance. A great example of this is in Mexico currently, Tehran, Mexico. Tehran, Mexico is an anarcho-environmentalist, indigenismo anarchist community that with a population of somewhere around 11,000, possibly 18,000. It depends on where it is, right? Now, they're illegal. Like their existence is illegal and they are like officially like a problem with the Mexican state. And yet Mexico trades with them and Mexico kind of leaves them the fuck alone. One, because they have more problems dealing with the cartel, but two, because they are an armed, sizable population and it's not worth it. Even though Mexico has the power to fucking bomb Tehran, Mexico out of existence for daring to declare, fuck you, we're not your citizens, we don't pay your taxes, and we're doing whatever the hell we want to do, is that there is a deterrence there. So I think that a similar argument is made, especially once you come to the conclusion that occupying an armed population is very different than just killing an armed population. It's one thing for the United States government to decide we don't like Florida anymore, so we're going to bomb Florida out of existence. It's another thing going door to door while there's a resistance. I think France proved this during World War II, where they were able to ferret the Nazis by using dinner plates, and the Nazis would slow down their blitzkrieg just because they thought the dinner plates might be mines, right? Like you can do a lot more than you think with a small group of people in a population.
Okay.
When the invading country is too afraid to take that on.
$10 for fondue. I view the moral argument for the Second Amendment as the state gets authority from the people. It would mean the state should arm the public, and the people should, as a culture, have the duty of protecting it. I want to get Anja's answer here. He mentioned in his opening mental health as one of the solutions. Do you have anything else? Any other things that you would implement aside from gun control?
Yeah, so I think a big issue with this is that I think it's a social issue and not necessarily just one that you can fix by getting rid of guns.
Can you elaborate on social issue? You think the violence in America, the rise in violence and increase in America is a social issue? Can you elaborate a little bit?
I think that as time has gone on, we're experiencing some insane shifts in our realities, right? A lot of social changes happening, a lot of like technological changes happening at a very, very rapid pace. And there are a lot of people out there that just probably can't exactly 100% cope with this properly. So through that, and the fact that we haven't really adjusted to these concepts very quickly as far as like policy and legislation, those are what I would rather focus on rather than trying to get rid of guns. I would rather create better infrastructure, better ways to deal with these new things coming up, maybe social failings that we're having. I think Fabian brought up about familial issues and stuff, maybe creating better infrastructure there, maybe giving people more options on allowing themselves to have more options for schooling, if that's what they choose. I think there are a lot of small things that you can do that would create huge changes to our culture and ourselves socially that would benefit us much, much more than taking away guns.
To the pro gun control side, right? Do you also consider this a social issue, like the rise in gun violence? Do you think that, and to what extent do you think this is a quote unquote social issue?
It is a partially social issue. I just think every time that the claim is made that we can't trace it back to guns, I look at every verifiable piece of information that we have on gun violence across the world, and I don't see how we can make that conclusion. Um, Other
Why?
countries have poverty. Other countries have all the same issues that we have. I don't understand how we're uniquely not equipped to deal with the changing world, or we're uniquely susceptible to mental health issues, or uniquely susceptible to poverty, or anything like that, for us to be cultivating an atmosphere of, encouraging gun violence or mental health problems or anything like that. I just don't see it. I think that the problem is quite obviously raw numbers, per capita, whatever you want. The problem is uniquely American, and we have more than double the amount of firearms of the next closest country. We are blowing them out of the water. Saying that there are social issues that are components of this, there are things like that at play, I think is fair. I want to address those things. I want investment capital in poor areas. I want to focus on mental health. I want social programs. I want all those things. Scott hates me right now. I'm sorry. Uh, and that's totally fine. I just think that the most immediate overnight solution to reducing the 20 to 40,000 gun deaths that we have per year is removing the easiest way of inflicting this death. Um,
So,
it's
what do
just
you think the
obvious to me.
problem is in? What do you think the problem is in France? Because France has a
Elaborate.
much lower gun ownership than us, and yet they have higher per capita gun violence. So, like, what is uniquely a problem in France if it's not the guns? According to
Uh,
crimeresearch.org.
I haven't researched what goes on in France that would differentiate the two societies. I don't
What
know.
do you think? What do you think the problem is? And I'll repeat the question from earlier in the panel. Right, between 1970s America, right, at least in terms of talking about mass shootings and school shootings, where
Yeah.
guns were far more widely available in and near schools, where kids were taught how to fire firearms in schools, in the fight against communism, right? So they were better trained to use those firearms, and there was much more likely to have firearms near or around the schools,
It,
and
it
yet there wasn't an issue.
I see where you're getting at. It just seems like a red herring to me because, again, I'm not attributing the gun violence problem purely to school shootings. It's not what I'm talking about in this conversation. So
Okay,
Scott,
there's been
so
is
an increase in
France?
school shootings, absolutely. Probably copycat crimes. I mean, ever since Columbine, there's been a 300% increase in the rampancy of school shootings per year. Yeah, it's definitely a problem. I don't think that you can attribute it to there being less access to guns in schools now or something like that. If
Would you
anything,
attribute it to social media instead of guns?
oh, well, I
No,
definitely think there's I no, I think it's guns, but I think that there's other components that influence that. Like, I think that, one common theme we see with some of these guys, I just care less about the mass shooting thing than a lot of liberals do, to be honest with you guys. But I think one common theme that you see is, kind of access to internet getting radicalized in these weird, like, sectors of the internet, like 4chan and stuff like that. I don't know how I feel about being a proponent of internet censorship laws. I just think that there has to be some thought given to, to give Anja some credit here, the world is rapidly changing. We have access to information that 30 years ago people would have never even thought they would have anywhere near the level of access to that they do now. Um, and there's common elements of these school shooters becoming radicalized through their online presences.
I want to
Um,
get the answer from Daedalus, or from Daedalus first, and then pondering politics. The
just super
social.
quick,
Oh,
pondering in Kilo, the what I was citing is gun deaths
okay.
from mass shootings, and at crimeresearch.org is in the Discord.
I'll
Not
check it
not
out.
the
They
Thank you.
number
they
itself,
could
but the deaths.
they can look at that while maybe Daedalus
Mhm.
answers this. Daedalus, do you think the social component? Do you think there is a social component? Do you think it is a major component? And what would you say to the argument that we need to tackle it from there rather than guns? Go ahead.
I absolutely think there's a social component to crime. There's a social component to a lot of things. Like we tried to divorce suicide from this earlier, and I don't think that works either. I think you have a lot of different factors that go into why we are experiencing violence in society, and you have a lot of avenues that we can pursue. Uh, in addition to more stringent gun control. So yes, absolutely, we should pursue things. We should pursue things like economic development. We should pursue more intervention in areas that have traditionally not seen significant government intervention to provide more resources. And these have to be very local, I think, problems
Where
too.
where would that be? Where in America would you find areas that need more intervention and haven't had enough economic investment that are a particular issue in terms of crime and gun violence? And where I can't think of any off the top of my head. Can you come up with like a city or a county or something?
There are plenty of places. Most of the major cities throughout the Midwest have significant issues with this. You have significant places where you have gun violence in St. Louis, for example.
So you're saying St. Louis specifically has gun violence issues and they're underinvested compared to like the rest of the country in terms of like funds towards education? Because I mean, maybe you're right. I'd love to see the data on that. It's just usually when people talk about low socioeconomic status cities, you're almost always talking about where a lot of funds have gone to try and fix these problems, and those programs simply haven't worked.
Like Chicago and Detroit.
I-
Just to name
would
two
you-
right there off the top of my head.
I'm just
Any
curious. I
urban
mean, are
area is
they
gonna have
actually
a-
underinvested? Yeah.
You have some pretty significant underinvestment issues in St. Louis, Chicago,
So-
and Detroit.
Okay.
Highly-
Okay. So how are you defining underinvestment then? If like, do you just mean that it's not enough, despite the fact that money is being funneled from taxpayers into cities to presumably give people opportunities, but it's underinvested because there's an arbitrary, or maybe not, maybe you have data to back it up, a specific limit of investment that you deem to be appropriate? Because I just don't understand what you mean by underinvestment if money is going from other places to these places to give them opportunities and they're still struggling and failing.
Well, let's give him a chance, Dados. Can you give us can you elaborate on this underinvestment specifically? You mentioned St. Louis. Can you which particular program or which particular aspect of this is not receiving the funds that you think it should?
So what I'm really trying to get at is we have local neighborhoods, St. Louis, Chicago. I come from Chicago, actually. So we have local neighborhoods where you have very significant high amounts of investment, and you have local neighborhoods, for example, in the south side of Chicago, where you don't see a lot of investment in things like schools. You don't see a lot of investment in businesses. You see food deserts. You see a lot of factors that create opportunities for crime. You have less crime where you have more economic success. So if we have areas that are less economically successful, those are places where we have opportunities to create more investment and create less crime.
So when you say that there's specific sectors, what you're saying is that local politicians are choosing to take whatever funds are designed to go to the high crime, high poverty areas and then intentionally funneling them to other neighborhoods and intentionally creating food deserts and things like that. Dog, you should write that up and get it to the New York Times, because that sounds like some amazing investigative journalism on corruption of politicians, almost like, the state has a problem.
I
That's
want to jump in and
not
say,
what I'm getting at.
well, if you look at like a place like San
What are you
Francisco,
getting at?
for example, these laws, like the gun laws and the making people not able to fight back if someone robs you, they're actually creating more economic disparity as businesses flee because they're worried about people coming in and just wholesale robbing their store. I mean, you
That's
see a
not-
video every
I'm not denying that can be potentially a component of it, but that's pretty bad faith to say that that's the reason why people are impoverished in San Francisco.
I can think of like 3 or 4 anecdotal examples just from Seattle after the chop, where friends of mine, family moved, owned businesses in that area and moved, and now those businesses are gone. So I mean, I know that's an anecdotal example, and those are not like overall, can't speak to everything, but like if a business is destroyed or it's robbed until they're losing money, it's going to hurt it economically. It causes
The
all
number
problems
one
that-
reason why businesses move away from coastal cities like that is because of property values and tax rates. It's
which
not.
are tied to what, crime rates? Does that have any effect on that?
You think crime rates make those property values go up?
Down. They make them go down. So whenever
No.
you're taking away people's
No.
ability to defend themselves
They
in
are
the
leaving
stores,
because it's too expensive
Yeah.
to stay there. Okay,
I mean, that's part of it.
Scott. No, that's the biggest reason. I'm just telling you that's the number one reason. Okay, Scott.
Yeah, but that's a kind of an irrelevant statistic, right? Like, it's like, why do 80%
not related to
of
what we're talking
restaurants
about, it just-
fail in their first year, right? Like,
That's fine.
obviously,
it's just not,
crime is a disincentive towards business. Obviously, it will lower your property values, which will in turn lower your rent costs and lower the amount of taxes that you pay. But it also
that's not
lowers,
what's happening in these
it
coastal
also
cities.
it also lowers the amount of the amount of potential profit that you can make in a community as well. If a community is ridden with poverty and crime, you don't make money there.
Yeah, there's not as much capital in the area. I get it. I'm just saying it's not the number one reason is not because of crime.
But it's
There's a
a major
variety of other
reason.
factors.
It's
I think it's
major
a
contributing factor.
small component.
Yeah, it just seems like an
and
irrelevant statistic to
Yeah.
combat an irrelevant statistic that he admitted was anecdotal. I don't know.
It's
It
kind
seems
of
like
a
you're trying to
chicken and
slip,
the egg thing either
slip
way.
in
I don't
some-
know where
yeah.
I don't know where you can say begins and ends. But Scott, I
Yeah.
looked up. Did you say gun violence rates were higher in France than in the United States?
The death rates from gun violence in France. It's in the data that I linked to you. There's a chart.
I have numbers that refute. This is my problem with these kinds of conversations. We can both find numbers that support something different. My numbers, it's
Yeah,
not even
I mean
close.
there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics, which is why consequentialism and taking people's rights away is a fucking problem.
Okay.
Which is my original argument.
I wanna
And you
I
admit
wanna I wanna give Pondering a chance to answer the social aspect of these things, right?
Well,
Because I did ask
I
the other
think that
two.
Kilo and Daedalus basically covered him.
Okay,
I
fair
think
enough.
that's a multivariate problem. I think that everybody here made a compelling case that there's clearly a social and quote unquote cultural component. Like you compare, what is it like? Doesn't Switzerland have like a higher or a comparable rate of gun ownership in the United States, or excuse me,
way higher
compared to the United States?
per
It's
capita,
higher,
yeah.
yeah.
And considerably lower gun violence, right? But if you look at it, I mean, the number one.
Higher
wait, I'm
amounts of
sorry, it's
grenade
not-
attacks, though.
Wait.
Way more
It's not
grenade
higher
attacks.
per capita. I don't think that's true.
Okay, just real quick,
It's the close-
I hate to interrupt you, but
It's the
thank you
closest
for
of
the
developed nations to us, yes.
yeah, thank you for the gift subs, gang. Thank you for the super chats. This is the last stream of the month, so if you want to help me get over the hump here and pay my bills, super chat, gift subs, all those things very much would help. Okay,
Guys,
fair
remember,
enough.
if we get Wick to 5,000 subs, Scott has declared that he will
If we get
vote
to
for President
5,000
Biden in
subs,
2024. You heard it here first,
know
people.
what I
You
do,
heard it here
but-
first.
Okay,
But no, I do think they made
go
a
on.
compelling case here because again, like you look at Switzerland and you know, like they have like what's it called? It's not the draft, but like not even selective service. It's like mandatory military service. So most of their adult population is trained in the use of firearms.
yeah.
It's where most people get their guns. They look at like there's recreational shooting that's extremely common there. It's sportsmanship, but they don't have. You know, this isn't a nation that was birthed in like an armed revolt against Great Britain, right? So like we have just had like this wild west mentality associated with guns that is clearly like socially reinforced. So yeah, and then of course
Also-
you go ahead.
I don't mean to interject. I apologize. I just want to briefly mention. I think that I can find more numbers about this. USA, I think everyone agrees, does blow the rest of the world out of the water in terms of gun ownership. Switzerland does not own more guns per capita than we do. I have the difference being first for the USA and 18th for Switzerland. What we are
wow.
comparing is their gun laws, their accessibility and restrictions and all that kind of stuff. That's what's very, very comparable.
They have much
Right.
tighter controls in Switzerland than we do here too.
Okay,
I don't
Well-
know if that's true, but
sure. Let me ask this. So Kilo, you've already said you wanted to remove all guns, but for the other two on the pro gun control side, do you think there is any value in allowing private citizenry to own guns, and what level of that
I'm
would
finding
you
other
allow?
data. I'm finding data
Oh.
in the opposite direction too. Just for the
Well, again,
The
you
data
guys can go
wars
back and forth
begins.
on this data all day. I think that
Yeah.
it's almost like a circle the drain thing. I don't think we're going to get anywhere with that, and I want to kind of keep this conceptual a little bit too. So go ahead. Like,
So I'll speak.
yeah,
I
please.
mean, I'll buy Daedalus some time, but
Oh,
like,
and
so-
Testicle Johnson for $2. The Second Amendment sucks ash / Whick. So okay.
So here's the thing. So this is part of the problem. This is where again I'm really sympathetic to Anja or whatever, just like looking at practical policy because I don't have like an inherent absolute objection morally to the Second Amendment. I grew up in a red state. I live in a red state. Most of my family members own guns. I fired guns before. Responsible
own a gun?
Say what?
Do you own a gun?
I do not. No.
Do you
but
own a
I
gun,
also
Kilo? Just real quick. Do you own a gun,
Can
Kilo?
I get your address after this? I'm looking for a good place to rob.
I
right,
I
so
don't
check
own a
your
gun. I'm
DMs,
actually
check your
getting-
DMs.
Daedalus,
Scott.
do you own a gun?
Appreciate it.
Not currently. I have in the past.
Okay, fair enough. Carry on. I'm just curious.
But I also like knowing, and this is what I've told people before when I've had these conversations. I also like knowing that if I ever felt the need to own a gun, if I ever felt either for recreation or self-defense, that I have the right to do it relatively easy here in the United States. So it's not like I have a moral objection to it. But again, I guess I look at the Second Amendment like most other rights, including free speech and religion and assembly and whatever, that there are certain constraints and restrictions I think that the government has a right to impose. And given the rate of gun violence, and yes, I understand that mass shootings are a relative minority in terms of the gun violence we experience, I think that the problem is pervasive enough that the government has a moral right, the constitutional right, to attempt legislation to curtail this, even if it's clumsy, even if it doesn't work, even if we have to repeal it and then try something else later. And is going so far as to just take guns away from everybody. Number one, we can't do it. It's not feasible. But even if we could, I guess I would hesitate to do it. And some of the reasons that Scott identified too, because you'd almost have to disarm the planet because guns would find their way in across borders as well. So I wish I could say for performative sake that, fuck yeah, get rid of the Second Amendment, just burn it all to the ground. But I can't. And I am open to arguments either way. Like I think Kilo could probably try to make a compelling case for Second Amendment abolition.
If you let me talk long enough, I
Okay.
promise.
Okay, well, we don't have time for that.
Scott would be the little devil, the little libertarian devil on my shoulder, trying to like refute
Oh
me.
yes,
So
the evil freedom and
I want to
rights.
give Daedalus a chance to answer this question as well. Daedalus, what level of gun ownership are you okay with for private citizens?
So I'm not inherently opposed to gun ownership on its face. I think if a person is capable of uh, responsibly handling a weapon, then they absolutely should have that right. However, the problem is that we don't socially seem to be at that point. And I also acknowledge that at this point, gun control is probably a ship that's sailed. We have about 46% on estimates of private ownership of weapons here in the United States. It's probably a ship that's sailed. So, and I'm not opposed to people owning weapons recreationally. I
Mhm.
do not see a practical application. My background is military history, and I do not see a practical application of a widespread militia system that was originally envisioned in the Constitution. It's
Mm.
over and done with.
Okay.
It's been done with since the 70s and the institution of the all volunteer military force.
can I ask
And
Daedalus a question real
yes,
quick?
please.
So Daedalus, again, I think there's some commonality there. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that the ship has sailed necessarily on gun control. I probably have a bit more optimism than you. But let me ask you this. It's kind of like a question I asked Anjas earlier. Even if you agree that there's, at the bare minimum, that gun control would not be a panacea, do you think that government has both the legal right and moral obligation to try to pass common sense or logical or efficacious, good faith, whatever you want to do, like make a sincere, good faith effort to try to pass gun control legislation, even if you don't think it would have the intended effect?
I mean, yeah. Even a constitutional amendment is not necessarily permanent. We had prohibition in the 20s and ended up repealing that. So, like, I think there's room without necessarily giving away the farm to try some kind of method of government control.
Okay. A question for the whole panel. The last question, then we'll get to closings. I want to respect everyone's time, but I'm curious, and this might spark a little discussion. Okay. I think everyone's okay for gun use and self-defense here. Like, no problem with that. Am I wrong? Pretty much everyone's okay. If you're threatened, you can pull out a gun. Okay. Um, question: do you think it's okay to shoot someone who comes into your home that was uninvited and intends, or you believe is intent, to rob the place? Do you think it's okay to shoot them dead?
Does anybody disagree with that? I mean,
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
it's a
disagree,
pretty
yeah.
common sense thing. I
Okay.
mean, I mentioned earlier, Thomas Jefferson's influence of John Locke. I think John Locke solved this problem. And again, like I said, via utilitarianism, but trying to use that as a means to discover natural law. In his second treatise on government, he describes the thief in the night as putting himself in a state of war. Right? When an individual comes in your home in the middle of the night, they've declared war on you and your family because you don't know what their intentions are, and you have no reason to trust their intentions because they've broken into your home. The only way you can trust their intentions is if they leave your home, they're safely away, right? And they've paid some form of restitution. And so at that point, you're perfectly within your rights to
Okay,
shoot
they've
and kill
escaped your
this
home.
person.
Okay, they come in, they rob you, they're running out with all your stuff. Can you shoot them?
as they're running away with all of your stuff. I would say
With
you
your
get
money
into
or
a
your wallet and things, right?
I would say you get into a tricky position there. I would need more
Do
context, right?
you shoot them in the back?
Well,
That's
I
the
mean, I live in the
context. You
state.
woke
I live
up,
in the state of
you see
Virginia. I'm
them,
not stupid enough to go to prison for that.
they got your wallet, they got a bunch of your valuables, and they got them in both arms, and they're just
Scott, they have that framed picture
moving
of me
away.
hanging above your bed, and they're running out
Mhm.
of the house. Do you shoot them in the back?
Oof, man, I mean, when you take my beat off material away from me, it becomes a difficult
I'm
conversation
actually
for me to
with
behave.
Scott on this one. Like, so that's where I was kind of grimacing with the initial hypothetical because I guess if a person breaks into the house, I don't know their intention. I have. It's not like so. I actually had a DoorDash delivery guy who was supposed to go to my neighbor. I left my door unlocked, and he walked in. When he knocked on the door, he like went to put down, and then he's wrong house.
God, bam, 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 bam.
Right.
Like,
Right. Obviously not.
Lit
But
him
like
up.
in the hypothetical where I have strong reason to believe that they're either here to rob me or hurt me, then yeah, I probably wouldn't quibble at all over a person, exercising self-defense with a gun. But in a situation that the second hypothetical where they've already robbed me and they're leaving, no, I don't think that a person should shoot somebody in the back even
Well,
if they steal your shit.
Hold on.
I
Y'all
think the
been
problem
making
here is the
arguments all
difference
day about
between
the greater good.
should. The difference is between should and do you have a right to, right? When under the premise of should, that's a personal moral preference that I probably wouldn't shoot that person. Do you have a right to defend your property and shoot them in the back if they refuse to drop your property and leave? I would say
Okay, do you
absolutely have that right to shoot that person.
Well, then why did you hesitate, or was it because Whick asked should?
Because he should. I don't like killing
okay,
people.
Let me clarify the question so we don't have this problem. Should someone who does this be arrested and go to jail for it?
Absolutely not. They have every right to defend their property.
The legal
if someone
and
is
a
stealing
moral
the
question.
property.
Legally, I think probably not. I wouldn't shoot anyone in the back.
Okay.
Yeah, but in the state of Virginia, I can't do that.
You can't shoot
enough.
someone in the back in Virginia. I just for Gibbs, I think you're about to touch on this a second ago. You said that we've been making arguments in support of the greater good all day. I don't think that my property is more morally, worthy of consideration than someone else's life. So, if someone enters my home, yeah, I mean, it's a last resort for me to try to. I think I'd actually probably, assuming that I have the proper training to feel confident enough doing this, I would probably try to incapacitate them first before I try to shoot him in the brain or something like that. I definitely would not shoot someone in the back. My stuff's insured. I can get it back. I wouldn't want to live for the rest of my life knowing that I ended someone else's life.
Or die in the process.
No one
Yeah,
saying that.
right.
I would take a different stance. I think you're morally obligated to shoot them in the back because we said
Obligated?
Obligated. I'm going to tell you why. Because you're not only that, finish them off if you can. But I'm saying if you're sitting here and you're going, oh, we're talking about the greater good. This person's clearly a criminal. They're clearly breaking in. They're clearly causing damage. They could be potential harm to other people. Let's get them off the streets.
So
all
obligated.
criminals,
You would say that
criminals
someone who
deserve to
does not-
die?
No, stop. I want to be clear on this. You would say, right, that someone who does not shoot someone running away with their stuff in the back to kill them is doing a moral wrong.
Yes, you're enabling crime to continue and perpetrating bad things. But let's get the criminals off the streets.
Okay, I just want to say
Defend
this,
yourselves.
Gibbs. You seem like a nice guy. I've enjoyed our conversation. The idea that criminals, just because for the virtue of being a criminal, all deserve to die is
I didn't say
insane
they
to
all
me.
deserve to die. I'm saying that if you're going to sit here and defend yourself, you have a moral obligation to shoot to kill. Like, let's not shoot this guy and maim him.
You're saying
Have a terrible life for the
you
rest of
saying I have a moral obligation to shoot another human being for taking my stuff is kind of reprehensible to me.
I mean,
No,
so
what's reprehensible is that you don't agree with him, right? If you agree with you literally are the person that sits here and says, I do not care about fundamental human rights so long as my analysis of the consequences leads to what I believe to be the greater good. And he gives you a scenario where he says, if you do not stop this person that is a criminal, they are likely to harm and other people, and you're letting that happen because of your personal
no.
histrionics.
You're saying
That's
letting that
bullshit.
happen. Do you
Even
think
if
I?
they're arrested, even if they're
do-
arrested, you're still causing a net negative because now the government has to take
But
taxpayer dollars.
this is
to
cognitive
provide for a
What are we
dissonance.
paying them for, Gibbs? No. To say I would let it happen is super disingenuous. What am I doing to try to? I just said I would use the firearm in my own home as an absolute last resort. I definitely wouldn't shoot someone in the back, but I'm immediately calling the police. I'm immediately giving them a description. I'm writing it down if I can in my phone, what they look like, what they were wearing, everything. I want that person apprehended. Absolutely. I want my
Yeah, but
stuff back if possible.
You're not engaging with it. What you're doing is just adding unnecessary context about other actions that
How
are
is that
that are
not engaging? What are
close
you
to
talking
the
about?
thing. No, what I'm saying is that your argument is that gun control is good because it leads to moral preferences that you have, which is life potentially, less shootings, less crime, etc., based off of your utilitarian calculus. He then
I'm not a
gives
utilitarian,
you,
but yeah, go ahead.
well, I mean, but that's the process you're using, even if you're not a utilitarian. Like, you could even be like, I mean, if you want to come back with a particularist argument, like, I'm willing to hear it if that's what you are. I still think it's wrong. But nevertheless, he then gives you and reverses your own logic in the exact same scenario by saying it is okay to take someone's life, their liberty, their property, right? So long as the consequences lead to a better and safer outcome for everyone involved, which would be killing the criminal.
I explained
And
my
you
moral
say
framework.
that's morally,
I
but you say that's morally reprehensible, but he's using the same logic you're using, which makes
It's
you
morally reprehensible because of the scale that we're using.
Stop. I want to give Anja a chance because we only have a couple more minutes. I want to give, he hasn't had a lot of speaking time, so I want to give him the chance. Then what we're going to do is we're going to have closing statements, and then I'm going to open up the panel, and if people want to come on, and if you all want to stay, because I want to address this question, I want to address Gibbs. Gibbs, please stay. I have some questions for you.
And Daedalus said, Daedalus looked like he wanted to also
Yeah,
speak too.
I'll throw in something in the ass after Anja.
So, Onja, Daedalus, then we're gonna go to closings. Cool. Onja, go ahead.
So as far as the shooting somebody in the back as they're running away thing, I think that obviously legally you get into a lot of hot water in those sorts of scenarios. There's no self-defense argument there, or really trying to protect property, really even. But I think one of the conversations we're having right now is if property itself could have similar or same value as a human life. And I think when we get to these conversations, especially with people on the left, I'm on the left, so I'm saying that this gets complicated for us. A lot of our worldview on things like abortion, brings into question how much we view the sanctity of life. So I have to think, are you saying that there's no such scenario in which property can be as equal value as somebody's life if it is very important, and if you lose that property, it could have detrimental consequences to your way of life?
Property is inseparable from a human's life.
Scott, I'd love to talk to you about this someday. You and I are very far apart on this.
It's going to go to open, so if you guys can stay for that, we can probably get into that because this bears on the Gibbs statement. But I want to give Daedalus last thoughts. Go ahead.
So my grandfather had a pretty elegant solution to the first problem. He kept a 38 special. And the first round was a full metal jacket because he figured he was going to fire it into the wall and try to scare the guy off. The second round was a hollow point because he figured if he's going to fire into the wall, he might as well have a small hole to patch instead of a big one. As for shooting someone in the back, I don't think I would take that step.
Okay. Gang, it has been an interesting discussion. I have enjoyed it immensely. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you are on Twitch, hit that follow button. To the Scots community, thanks for not making us mod you a lot, right? You've been pretty well behaved, so I appreciate that.
My community's great. Fuck off.
Yeah, no. You're welcome anytime. But please consider following the channel if you have not yet. We have these discussions all the time. And yeah, so let's get closing statements. Tell people where they can find you. You've all been great guests. I've appreciated having every single one of you on. So yes, thanks for making this easy for me.
Real quick, can you ask Admiral Gibbs to put on his Mando helmet for his closing statement? Because I mean, there's just I see it looming there in the background.
Maybe if we get 5 subs in chat right now. 5 subs in chat, and he'll do it, gang. I promise you. I will make him. I will use coercive force and pressure
I'm
of
an
the state.
ultra-capitalist. I'm definitely down for that.
Okay, sweet. But Anja, we're gonna start with you. Give us your closing and give us where we can find you. Go ahead.
So you guys can find me at ElijahCER on Twitter. I don't really stream much anymore, so there's really no point in me giving you my Twitch. But I'll say, for me personally, this conversation has been interesting. There's a lot of wildly different perspectives. I think I have very different reasons of why I believe gun rights are important versus the other people that were on my side. But I just think overall, yeah, I mean, we were kind of all over the place. I think that there were a lot of questions that didn't necessarily get answered. It's kind of the nature of these things, but it's a conversation that's important and is worth happening. And I just think it's fucking fantastic that you guys came out here and took place in this conversation. I mean, it's important for us to have these conversations. So,
Okay, we got 1 sub for the hat. We're gonna go to you last, Gibbs, because we're gonna give people time. So we got 1 sub towards the hat. We need 4 more, gang. Fabian, Liberty Scott, give us your closing.
Yeah, I'm Fabian Liberty pretty much everywhere: Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, YouTube. I want to read this statement because I spent an hour writing it, so I'm going to read this statement. I had 2 prepared. This is kind of a mixture of the 2 that I've been fucking with. So, regardless, I'll just spit it out and then I'll shut the fuck up. Since 1789, the Constitution has been the enshrined and incomplete philosophy of the United States. Our founding fathers established this nation in the name of liberty and Enlightenment values, perhaps at the peak of their instantiation. One fundamental right they realized was that of self-defense and the arms necessary for it. The Second Amendment was designed to establish this human right as unquestionable. The amendment forbids the federal government from infringing on the rights of citizens to have any weapons the military uses and enshrines the right of private militia. This is further proven in the actions of Madison in the War of 1812, as well as a slew of comments from the founding fathers. They knew it was our civic duty to assassinate authoritarian governments that infringe on our liberties. Private property and the right of self-defense are human rights. Enlightenment liberalism was discovering these rights through convergence and utilitarian analysis while exploring and challenging natural law perspectives. The influence of Locke, for example, is painfully obvious in Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence, where he references that all men have an inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. Unfortunately, founding fathers made a mistake. They were incapable of grounding these rights as objective facts they are. They did not foresee that so many fellow Americans would abandon liberty in support of tyranny. They did not see the degradation of the dominant philosophy that would sweep our nation as utilitarianism's weak foundations are subverted by future evil philosophies. Proponents of gun control are this evil. Unlike the Enlightenment philosophers who were searching for truth through the scientific method, these by and large neophytes inherited the dialectic, searching instead to confirm their histrionic and Gnostic beliefs. They will reference the science, the data, and attempt to argue that human rights may be stripped from you. They will argue that they can violate human rights because the data shows a universally preferred outcome. Never mind that this data is inherently soft science, usually conducted by ideologically captured public health experts, while conflicting data from behavioral economists will be discounted. At best, it establishes a historical fact that is unable to draw causation, and at worst, the methodology is laughable. Last 2 sentences. The necessity for this debate is due to the founding fathers not going far enough and instead instituting a liberal democracy. They hoped for a people to continue down the path of enlightenment they set forward. Instead, we are living in the shadows of giants whose shoulders we refuse to climb atop. In this, they are blameless, for the discoveries of natural law were incomplete. But for those who support gun control, they deserve nothing but derision and mockery for the specious, contemptible arguments they forward.
Goddamn. Okay. Next, Fabian, please. Or not Fabian. Oh, no, please. Pondering
again, no.
politics. Pondering politics. Pondering politics.
So
us
Scott
your-
was muted the entire time. I don't know if he knows that, but I didn't hear a word.
You
No,
were
just kidding.
absolutely not, please. We
Yeah,
got
you
it
know.
the first time. It's good. And thank you
so-
for the sub, Parallax. If we get one more individual donor, we go to Hype Train and we can wick out while they're giving their closing statements. Go ahead.
So I'm Josiah, aka Pondering Politics on YouTube. One word, YouTube/Pondering Politics. I am a devout progressive and lefty, strong anti-Republican, and by Republican I do mean the Republican Party. Yeah, this conversation, it was fun. It definitely didn't go the way I thought it was. It was kind of schizo and scattershot, as Anja said. For me personally, Look, I don't claim to have all the answers. I think this is extremely complicated. There are huge gaps in research. There's huge gaps in evidence as far as best practices are concerned. I don't think that the Second Amendment has been properly contextualized since the 2008 Heller case. I think we need to return to the pre-Heller interpretation of the Constitution. It does not enshrine or enable or encourage citizens to overthrow the government. That's nowhere to be found in the Constitution. It's expressly forbidden. And I think that the government has a legal right and moral obligation, given the disproportionately ridiculous rate of gun violence, which includes mass shootings, but also other things as well. It has a legal right and a moral obligation to try to address this via legislation, even if the legislation is incomplete, even if it's not completely efficacious. We can repeal what doesn't work and try something else. We just have an obligation to try to bring a better outcome for the United States, for our children, and for future generations. I am open to all kinds of arguments, from security to buyback options to, again, background checks, red flag laws. I do think that the research needs to be more comprehensive. We need to repeal the Dickey Amendment. The CDC needs to get involved. But yeah, I just want to basically return to the time when we all recognized that the Second Amendment was not absolute, it was not unlimited, and we have a right to constrain it as much as necessary. So that's me, Josiah Pondering Politics. Oh, and remember, if we get Whick to 5,000 subscribers, Scott's going to vote for President Biden.
We are on a hype train now. Thank you for the Prime sub, the gifted subs. Give me more. Again, it's the end of the month. I want to feed my family. I want to feed myself. I want to feed my puppy. Right. So more is better.
Did we get the subs for him
right?
to put the helmet on, Whick?
Right.
Did we get the subs?
Yeah, we need two more subs, and he gets a helmet on. So we got 2 more people to give closing statements. That's the time you have to give me 2 more subs. Okay, please, Kilo, let's try to make it a little more concise.
Yeah, concise. My name's Kilo the Giant. You can call me Kilo. I don't have a channel, but you can find me in Discord, Reddit, various Discord communities, Twitter for sure. Yeah, I loved this conversation. Super interesting. There's just the only problem we have is that there's a philosophical way to approach it, then there's kind of a moral way to approach it, and then there's like a legal way to approach it, and then there's like a practical statistical element that no one can really agree on. It makes it a little bit jumbled and kind of hard to really pin down exactly how we feel about it individually. I can tell you that my philosophy, which is overarching and affects all of my political ideologies, is that human life is the most important thing. It's paramount over everything else. I'm anti-harm. I'm anti-death. I think that any way that we can implement the legislature that will mitigate or address some of the violence, the harm, the deaths that are being inflicted with firearms is worth exploring, if not outright implementing as immediately as possible.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you. Yes, next up, Daedalus. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. I want to first of all thank everybody for showing up and thank Wick for having me. My name is Daedalus Media. I am one of the co-hosts of the new Two Guys Talking History show over on YouTube. You can find us there. We have a big green T temporarily until we get some art. And I just want to again thank everybody. And my dog's about ready to jump me, so probably time to get going.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here, my friend. And have a good one, buddy. Okay. Last, and we didn't make it. I'm sorry, gang. We needed 2 more subs and we didn't get it, but that's okay. Admiral Gibbs, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Admiral Gibbs. You can find me on pretty much every platform as Admiral Gibbs or Admiral_Gibbs. It's real simple stuff. In closing, you need guns to save you from the government. And that's really all that matters.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. Once again, like, subscribe, follow. We are going to open it up now for those of you who wish to stay. If you need to leave, I understand, right? But for those of you who wish to stay, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about Gibbs's statement, right? That not only is it okay to shoot the running, fleeing robber, but you have a moral imperative to do so, and not to do so means you have done a moral wrong. And I want to talk about the property versus life discussion, right? What property is worth a life? Is there any, right? And to what extent? Yeah, so we're going to be talking about that. If you want in, join the Discord. Accept the rules. Jump backstage. And I will give you the link. Or one of my mods, please. If you're in the chat, please provide the link in the Discord. So !Discord will give you that and you can jump backstage. So,
all right. Thank you
see
much.
You later, Daedalus. And we got
Bye,
Daedalus.
Yeah,
Bye,
we
Daedalus.
got a individual right now
Have a good
who's
night.
willing to come in. Hello, you're live.
I'm going to use the restroom, but I'll stick around for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes or so.
Sure. Yeah, we'll see if anyone's
Leave your mic
interested in
on.
this, or is it just me? So, while he's getting ready, right, while Ranger and Rogue is getting his stuff prepped, I want to talk to you a little bit, Gibbs, because I have some issues with what you just said. Do you think that criminals, specifically thieves, should be executed?
I mean, as far as like, okay, I think there's two things here.
Yes or no? Do you think that criminals, someone who steals, so say I miss, say I'm shooting at them and I miss, but the cops catch them, should they then execute them?
Probably not. No.
Why not? So what's the difference, right? What's the difference between so if the cops shouldn't be killing this person, right? Why should I?
Well, I'm going to say it's twofold. One, from the moralist standpoint that I was taking earlier, and two, from the legal standpoint that I will argue right this second, and then we come back to the other one. One, first of all, like if I'm sitting here and I'm shooting someone and I miss, or I hit them and I maim them, and then whatever happens, and they go to jail. For now they're like legal systems supporting this person. They have to pay for their meals, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, you do us all a favor by just finishing them off, really. And secondly, we're sitting here, we're looking at like from the moralist standpoint, this person's probably going to cause harm again. What is it? What's the statistics on repeat offenders looking like? It's outrageously
Okay,
high.
okay, I
I don't think
understand.
it's the government's job to like execute all these people because it's the smash the crime.
None of those variables that you just mentioned for reasons why you should shoot someone in the back that is stolen from you change if it's cops that catch them, right? None of those variables change.
I think it inherently does because less government
How?
is better.
How does it inherently change?
It's one. It's you're defending your stuff, right? And then there's consequences. Like, say if this person lives and you shoot them not to kill, they are very easily able to be sued in civil court. Like that is a substantial issue at a like individual level, right? That we've kind of not really touched on at all. But if we're gonna sit here and say, okay, what's the difference between a cop and a regular person doing it? The other thing is the cops. They're trained to like come in here and de-escalate situations and catch these criminals so they can implement the government's form of justice. That's kind of their job, right? As opposed to the individual citizen whose job is basically defend my stuff.
Wick, can I challenge him on this?
Please do.
Okay, Gibbs. If it is your moral obligation to try to prevent the criminal from potentially inflicting harm on anyone else by ending their life, why is it not the moral obligation of the institution that you fund to do the same thing?
I mean, at some level it is. At some level it is their job, right? However,
So you are advocating for execution for criminals just across the board.
I mean, not across the board, but I think for more
For
crimes that we
thieves
currently
at
execute
least,
them.
right?
I mean, no, not necessarily thieves. I mean, I guess I would probably put like some kind of limit on what their cost of like however much they stole, I guess, before they're executed. But I mean, that's all
Like,
arbitrary.
what's the amount? Can you ballpark it for me?
I mean, yeah, so that's all becoming arbitrary. So, I mean, you know what? Just for the sake of argument and ease, yeah, I'll say we should be executing a lot more criminals, and that could include thieves.
Okay. Go continue to deal with it if you wish, Kilo, or anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Scott.
I think you're fundamentally wrong, but I think it's because you're touching on something that I think you intuit, and you don't have a descriptive legal philosophy to figure out the ins and outs of what is objective here. Except, and I'm going to give you the right one, right? I'm going to give you the one that actually exists.
I have one.
Right?
Go ahead.
All right. So are you familiar with the principle of estoppel in law, in common law theory?
Go ahead. Just go ahead and explain it.
Oh, yeah. So estoppel is the idea that one cannot argue that something not be done to them or argue their innocence if their actions are proved to be that against what it is that they're saying, right? Or against their previous statements. You can recant previous statements. So, for example, if you are convicted, let's say, of drinking and driving, right? And then you get caught drinking and driving a second time in court, then you can't say, well, I've never drunk and drive, right? Because in a court of law, it's like, no, we've literally proven that you do engage in drinking and driving. Therefore, you can't argue that this is something that you don't do or that you've never done. You're stopped from being able to make that argument. Now, when you take that into natural law philosophy and you bring that into who is and isn't an inherent aggressor, what occurs is whether or not someone can argue for their own rights, whether or not they can argue that something not be done to them. So, for example, if I point a gun at you and I shoot you and I kill you, and your wife says, "I want justice," whatever your feelings on are about what that justice means, I can't argue that any of those things that she wants done to me not be done to me, because in order to pay restitution, in order to actually be able to argue that I have a right to my life, to her, the victim, right? Your wife or whatever, presumably. I don't know if you're married or whatever. Doesn't matter, right? I can't argue for those rights. And the reason is because let's say there was a machine, and if I step into this machine, it would kill me, but it would bring you back to life. There's no logical argument that I could make that I shouldn't be forced to step in that machine to give you your life back. That's restitution. So in the case of someone breaking into your house, right, I would say that the idea that like, oh, well, life's not more inherently valuable than your property is bullshit, because your property, your home, your safety, all of these things are important to you. They're in a state of war. You have a right to kill this person, and they can't argue that they have their rights given back to them until they return their stolen property and repay you for the damages. The problem is that I think you're taking it too far.
But
You're taking it too far, but I think it's because you're intuiting that there's something wrong with this idea.
I want to just let's clarify a little bit. Part of what I argued when I said that is, if we're sitting here, we're looking at the greater good, right? Overall, right? We're sitting here, then I would argue that you're morally inclined to finish them, because this is going to solve you for a greater portion of society is now not going to suffer either from the government having to fund this person's prison, or from this person harming other people in the future. Then you can't not argue that by deleting this person, then it's not going to be better for everybody.
Yes, I can.
Like that.
Yes, I can. And this is
Well,
see,
that's
this is the problem, and this is why I call Republicans family value consequentialists, because I can apply the same logic to you that I would to any leftist, right? You don't know the future. There are plenty of people that have been gangbangers that have gone to jail and have reformed in jail, found Christ, and have actually reduced gang violence by talking to former gang members, by doing community outreach, et cetera, et cetera. You don't actually know what the outcome of the future actions of this person are. The only thing that you're aware of is what has already occurred.
Scott is exactly correct. And a fundamental tenet of my moral system is that there is no one that is irredeemable. You are completely taking matters into your own hands and ignoring everything. You're flying in the face of everything that I know to be true about the universe. That's why I said it's morally reprehensible within my framework. Obviously, we're different. We just disagree. I just think within my framework, this is a morally reprehensible position to take.
Right.
No one is beyond redemption. And at the same time, it's not a logical argument. Hitler cannot make a logical argument that he not be killed. He can't logically argue that, not after committing a genocide.
Oh no, it's a pathos thing. There is no logical argument.
I want to give.
Arguing a lot of the what ifs.
I want to give some of the new folks a chance. Some of the
please. We know this person has done X.
Sure.
We might as well defend ourselves.
What do you think? And I'll ask the same question I asked to Gibbs to prompt that answer. And to Casimir, is that how you say your name, Casimir? And to Ranger and Rogue. Someone steals from you, right? They break into your house in the middle of the night. They take your stuff. And then they start booking it, right? They've taken your stuff. They got a sizable portion, right? Like your wallet, like your social security, maybe some expensive mementos, whatever, right? A good amount of your income that you would suffer without. Can you shoot them in the back and kill them? Is that justified? Should you be arrested if you do this, right?
I was just jumping on because I had a question just for Ruminate, but
oh well, we can get.
I just don't want to derail right now. Yeah,
he's gone right now. Okay, Casimir, what do you think?
Scott just gave you the perfect answer. I would say that the only thing you can change to justify the shooting is if the robber was armed. So if somebody barges into your home, threatens you with a gun, at that moment they have forfeited their life.
But without the gun, you say that someone who is robbing you should not be shot, and you should go to jail if you do so. That's your argument?
I think that you could potentially argue that there is an argument in our current law that if you that the only way for you to legally be on a property without constituting a threat is to do so during daylight, to come through the passage that's marked, to come to the front door where there's, the entrance to the house, and then to ring the bell and politely request admission. And then you get trespassed. If you're told to leave, you have to leave. Now, if you don't follow this, for example, if you show up in like 4 a.m., which is considered not a common visiting time, and if you show up through the back door, right, which is not a common visiting place, then the person can shoot you in the moment because they don't have to verify that you're not a lethal threat. It's considered in our society a lethal threat to visit somebody in such a time. However, in your scenario, the person is not a lethal threat anymore. Clearly, he's running away. Therefore, since you know that it's not a lethal threat, you just have to chase them.
Okay, what do we think? You guys want to argue about this or no? Or do you think this is kind of cut and dry?
I'm gonna have to go here in a few minutes. So I was here, but I heard the
Okay.
Rager and
You could
Rogue had a
do,
question
yeah, we
for
could
me.
give,
So go
if you have
ahead.
a quick question. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Ranger.
I just had a quick question. Like, what's you asked on your solution to gun violence? One of your first response was a universal background check. What does that mean to you?
So I think instituted at a federal level, all 50 states, that
As
um,
opposed to the background check that we have now, where we have 50 different background checks in 50
yeah,
different states?
yeah, I feel like it would have to be some sort of universal standard, I imagine, right? What it would, I imagine, be pretty hard to enforce if every state or locality had like a disparate sort of background check associated with it. But again, if that was just one piece of evidence or one solution that I proposed, just based on again what the Rand Corporation was throwing out there in terms of moderate levels of research to reinforce. So if you've got like quibbles with it, or if you think that it would not be effective, I'm certainly open to the arguments to the contrary.
No, it's just doesn't really make sense because currently we have a federal form in all 50 states. You believe in like the gun show loophole?
Isn't there a gun show
4470.
loophole?
No.
No. Gun shows are comprised of FFLs, which are federal firearm licensees. So they're backed by the federal government. They have to abide by all of federal regulations. And it's the same thing for our current background check, which is a 4473. It's just a federal background check.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
So,
just
so
say to be
what is a universal background check?
Well, it sounds like I would have to do more research on it, but it sounds like one is already imposed if based on what you're saying, and it's not efficacious. So I'll have to go back and do more research on it. I don't know enough to contradict you there.
Well, just as someone who's on your side, this is what I was kind of touching on earlier, which was that I don't think there's any statistical evidence to suggest that background checks do reduce gun violence unless they are in tandem with some other form of like licensing practices and things like that. So when someone says universal background checks, I don't think that the idea itself is the problem. I think that it's been shown to, in a vacuum by itself, not really work. It has to be done in tandem with other practices.
Just
Well,
because I don't know.
That was
right?
my point.
Just as a
I
question.
agreed
a
with you.
clarifying-
I 100%.
Yeah, a clarifying question because I don't know, right? If I personally wanted to sell my gun to Pondering Politics, would I need to get him a background check before I do that? From private to private sales, does that require a background check?
It depends on your state.
It depends on the
It's-
state. As
depends
far
on
as I
state.
know, it's very nebulous. But there's lots of places where there's not a whole lot of regulation on this on private
That
sales.
being said, if you end up selling more than like 2 or 3 firearms, depending on your state, in that manner, you can get in like the ATF is coming for you if they find it.
Ranger, would you propose?
There's some issues.
I'm sorry,
there.
just real quick before I head out. So, Ranger, would you oppose in a situation like that a background check be mandatory from private seller to private buyer?
Me personally, background checks are an entirely different issue. Under our current framework, it would make the most sense. Like if I was on the left arguing for strengthening background checks, I would definitely go after the private sale versus going to an FFL, which is literally, a federally licensed dealer.
Oh, well, to clarify, and again, this is probably
Josiah,
on my
before
fault,
you head out,
sir.
I want to speak to you as well briefly.
Sure. Well, hang on, real quick. I would just say so. Again, to clarify here, when I'm talking about, I guess, background checks, two things. I would say, number one, I imagine that they would need to be standardized at a federal level in all 50 states, so they couldn't be disparate. Number two, I guess in my mind, I am imagining a scenario in which legislatively they would be imposed on all legal gun transactions, which includes private seller to private buyer. And if you want to have a conversation where you could potentially educate me on the subject, if you have evidence where it would be efficacious or would not be efficacious, just DM me and you and I can set something up. Because again, what you will find is that the firmest position I have is that I think that the Second Amendment is subject to limitations and constraints. What things would be efficacious, I am open to. Again, because I also acknowledge that the research is extremely limited. So you can persuade me if you have the data to support it. Hey, actually, red flag logs would not be efficacious for this, this, and this. So why don't you and I set up a time if you're interested in
Yeah,
having a conversation about it?
absolutely.
Can you throw
Yeah,
me
that'd
a
be great.
DM
Yeah, of course.
right now
Okay, well,
so I can
I'm
add
glad
you?
I said it. I'm glad I facilitated this meeting of the minds. Excellent.
That's right.
Uh,
We've just made best friends right here. I thought it was just
I
Scott
did,
and I
yeah,
at
yeah.
first,
This
but
was
now it's
beautiful.
Ranger and Rogue.
True.
Casimir, can you go? Because I got to
Yeah,
go in about
I'll be
5
brief.
minutes.
I'm not your
Sure.
best friend, and I was calling you out consistently in chat because I believe you misquoted every point of data that you spoke about. Not that the data was necessarily wrong; it's just like the wrong data to use. Were complete red herrings. So it doesn't
All right.
matter if the USA has if the USA has more gun deaths or gun murders than some country. That statistic, that comparison doesn't matter at all. Like, it's ridiculous to quote. Why? Because if there is a country called Luxembourg, which is a fraction, like a tiny fraction of the size of the United States, then clearly it doesn't matter what policies you have, you will always have more.
He was referencing per capita numbers, which adjust for population.
Yes, but every single number that you referenced includes suicides, which the United States is number 2 in the world after Greenland, meaning realistically number 1 for a country that's not Greenland, which is suicide central. So the United States, if you remove the suicides from the data, it falls within that chart because suicides account for like 75% of the deaths, and this is still including gun violence, which is very much localized to gang controlled areas in the United States. If you reduce those, then we're one of the safest countries in the world, and none of your policies make any sense. So really, you have a gang crime problem in the United States and in other countries in the world. So, and if you look at per capita, and you said the word mass shootings at the start, and mass shootings cannot be per capita. The United States is number 11 in the world, number 11, with countries like Switzerland. I mean, people objected in chat that I quoted Norway as number 1 because it had one giant mass shootings. I don't know why you would exclude that. I mean, you choose years arbitrarily all the
Wait,
time.
is this mass shootings?
It is again, it is mass shootings controlled by using the same methodology, which is you have to make sure that mass shootings mean the same thing in different countries. So
Which is a problem trying to measure mass shootings because there are like
So don't
10,000
name
different
it.
definitions.
But
Yeah.
if you do name it, the best available data that we have, controlled for population, says that Norway is number 1 at 1.8 per, I think, million. France is, I believe, number 2 with like 0.3, and the USA is 1/3 of France at 0.08. So the United States is safer than France, even though we
No.
have overwhelmingly much more gun ownership.
You can't say
per
that we're
family.
specifically talking about mass shootings and then also say that we're safer when we've acknowledged that mass shootings are a small component of the gun violence problem.
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't introduce it into this debate early on.
You just said that just
Josiah,
now.
It was done by Josiah, and this one. So number 2, if you read the study by Rand Corporation, it is one of their studies. I don't think they're an unbiased source. They are neocons. They're known to be neocons. You would not quote them about anything else except gun control, because neocons actually are pro-military, but they're not pro-individual gun ownership. They would want our society more reliant on police. They would want more police funding because they represent those interests in the United States.
Well, that's
So-
probably why we should repeal the Dickey Amendment and allow for more comprehensive gun control research in the United States, the pros and cons. And it's the right wing in this country which prevented that. Absolutely.
Well,
So
Perhaps, but the rank
No, it's not
operation
perhaps. It's a
that
matter
you
of fact.
quoted,
It's simply a matter of fact.
quoted what their study did, what their major study did, which was published by Reason TV. In the video, there's a great summary that gun control policies don't work by Reason TV, and you would look that they referenced the RAND study, and what the RAND study did is they took the 2,500 of the best studies in the United States, and they debunked 95% of them. And in the last 5%, there were some studies that had marginal benefit in terms of
I don't think
policy
that they
that they
debunked them. I
couldn't
think they
control for.
excluded them because they weren't methodologically rigorous enough to be
For-
included in their
For the
analysis.
same reason why we discovered today, you can't really rely on just the raw numbers because you can find numbers that support both of your perspectives.
So
It's
they
probably
did.
the same
They
thing.
didn't
Your side
debunk
quoted raw
anything. They just
numbers
excluded
here
the
in
vast
chat.
majority of the research, which is why we need more comprehensive research.
And
So
to be fair, go ahead.
I think
well, I was just
Josiah
going to
has
say,
to go.
so I said
So-
mass shootings initially because that is one component, but I said throughout the remainder of the
Which
conversation,
is
gun
false,
violence
right?
in
You admit
general.
it's false now. Just to be sure, you admit it's mass shootings.
admit-
The United
I
States,
think he was
just say
fair.
the
No,
words. The United
he was
States is
fair.
not number one in mass shootings. That's it.
I admit what's false?
The United States is number 11 at mass shootings worldwide. Yes.
No, you
capita.
said that, but I don't know if that's true. You've offered no evidence of the if you want, you can send me the source.
Do you want me to stream the graph right now?
You,
According to CBRC
hang on,
study.
so bro, Casimir, we're having a conversation here. You said words offered no evidence to the contrary. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you say, I said these things, I demand a concession. Just DM me the source and I'll take a look at it. Just chill. It's all right. It's good.
Yeah, it's crimeresearch.org. I linked it multiple times in chat.
I wasn't looking at chat. I was looking at Discord here. I didn't have his chat up. So
okay.
I didn't see anything that
It
you
was
said,
linked
by
to
the
you
way.
by Scott.
It's the one
Say
that
what?
I linked you in Discord. The
I
chart
don't
is the
know,
one I
right?
linked you in Discord. So I brought
This
up
is the one he's
France.
referencing.
Wait, Casimir, I'm sorry. You cut out. The source sucks?
No,
No.
the
It's
source
the same.
is
The source. Scott
Casimir,
that
hush.
provided.
Oh, the source Scott. Oh, okay. I was
It's the
okay.
same one. He sent it to me, and I was like, all right, fuck it, I'll look at it.
Perfect. I'll check it out as
It's
soon
in
as I
Discord
can.
already.
Ranger and Rogue, let's set something up. Casimir, let's set something up. Let's talk about it. Send me a DM. I'm happy to chat with you about it. Okay?
Yeah,
Sure,
and
that's good.
one more tiny point about the years chosen. A lot
Thank you
of
for the
people-
$5, Josh CFC. There you go, Wick. Keep up the great content. I will. Okay, carry on.
A lot of people in chat complained about my study being between the year 2009 and 2015. I want to answer those people. So let's do the last 200 years.
I'm heading
instead.
out. Hey, guys, thank you. Casimir, Ranger Rover,
Have a
thanks,
great
everybody.
day.
Appreciate it. Talk to you
See
later.
you around, man.
I have another source which is called Necrometrics, and Necrometrics includes the stats for gun violence for the last 200 years, and it's sorted by millions. So, like, there's a page on where gun violence exceeded 5 millions in a particular country, which includes the Holocaust, the Holodomor, which was executed using gun violence, which includes the terror of Mao and the terror of Stalin, which includes gun executions. So, if we want to choose years and choose the most convenient, time scale, let's include all the mass genocides by government. Why not?
You know, we're talking about
just
right
real quick,
now.
Foster,
We're talking about.
Is I don't know what it is, but we're not picking you up. It's kind of
Sounds like your noise gate's a little too strong. Yeah, you pointing to yourself. Maybe reduce your noise gate a little bit.
Okay, sorry about that. Just because he's trying to say that's bad data, and I want to invite him in on the discussion, Falsers, to ask
You're
why.
quiet, but yes.
Okay, fair enough. I'll just have to be quiet. I don't have time to stop my audio. It's bad data. So the reason it's bad data is if we're having a conversation about relevant gun violence today in today's culture, we are not in World War II. We are not 100 years ago. We are not 200 years ago. We are in a
He's
modern
literally
era.
making that claim.
And so-
You're
we-
agreeing
we
with
want to
Casimir.
use- So that's
You-
fine. That's fine.
Yeah, you're
I don't-
agreeing with
I
him
don't- I
because
don't-
people were challenging him for using a limited time frame of the data, and he's saying, "Well, yeah, well, there's another source I can use. It's 200 years, but like this is the recent data."
Yeah, no
Yeah,
problem.
that's all.
So I do think Casimir did misrepresent a little bit of data as well, though. So when we talk about gun violence, obviously we're not going to talk about it like holistically in terms of the raw volume, because he makes a very astute point that we have a much higher population than
Can you not just turn your mic up just a smidge?
Probably not, because I'm using earbuds. I can add
Did you
earbuds
bump? You
on.
could bump him up, Wick.
He's at
Yeah, just-
200 for me.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I can hear him fine at like 1.
He sounds okay to. Yeah.
Carry on. Sorry.
Sorry about that. So we use per capita data, right? And even in terms of per capita data, we have a much higher gun violence rate than pretty much every other country of similar economic and developmental
Except
status.
France.
And that's and that no, not
That's
except
not true,
France,
Scott.
not
France
except
is
France.
I
France is
checked a
about a
bunch of numbers.
third.
It's ranked significantly lower. I
Yeah,
think the
I can
number
make
you're
it right
referencing
now.
is mass shootings specifically.
Yeah.
No,
Yes, which is what we quoted initially. And what
so
you're
to
doing
be
is you're
clear,
including suicides. Again, I
no,
debunk
no,
this point. You
no,
cannot
that's
say
wrong. That's
37,000
wrong.
deaths. You cannot say
That's wrong.
40,000 deaths when the actual gun deaths is only 10,000, and the
I'm happy to link you.
30,000 on
Hold
top
on.
of that
Hold on.
is
Hold on.
suicides. That's
Let me finish.
ridiculous.
Let me finish. This is not
Finish.
suicides. This is homicides that we're talking about right now. It specifically excludes suicides, and it's talking about homicides, firearm violence. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about self-inflicted suicides here. And so the United States still has a rate of homicides per 100K significantly higher than France as of 2022 data. And we see this going back in the trends as well. I will send that source right now so you guys can see it.
The reason why, Scott, just to be clear,
Mhm.
and Casimir, this is for you too. The reason why I made a point to repeatedly say that I don't need this conversation to circulate around mass shootings is because I feel like it does skew the data. If we just look at mass
Yeah.
shootings, which are statistically a relatively small component of our gun violence problem, we start getting all these crazy numbers from different countries per capita around the world. I'm not interested in that conversation. I'm interested in the total number of deaths that are because of guns. And to me, just to be clear, the suicide data is very compelling. I don't know if it's as
So
compelling. It is almost
I'm
as compelling for
curious.
me.
But you
But
won't
go ahead.
include the
I'm curious.
Holocaust.
Hold on. No. I'm just curious, right? We've reached a point in the discussion where, like, let's set mass shootings aside. Okay.
Yes.
If we set mass shootings aside, we are overwhelmingly talking about gang violence and crime issues from people that illegally purchase firearms on the streets. So if we're talking predominantly, if the gun problem is illegal purchases of firearms on the streets and gang violence, what are your solutions in terms of gun control that you believe is necessary to deal with those situations that don't infringe upon the liberties of individuals that are legally purchasing these firearms, since they're obviously in separate categories and they're not the problem?
I'm with you. I just, as I said earlier, that when we start to get into the numbers game of what percentage of these shootings are committed with legally purchased firearms, illegally, what percentage are gang related, it's a zero sum game. I can find numbers that support either side.
We can agree that it's a majority, correct? That it's a majority.
I don't know. No. I'm not being bad faith. I genuinely do not know.
Well, okay. So if you don't understand where any of the problem is, why in any way, shape, or form, we're pretending that I'm supposed to take a consequentialist analysis, and you don't have any ability to define any of the things. Well, then how is your system and your belief and your argument not simply subjective histrionics based off of I don't like guns, they feel icky and bad?
No, well, have I said that one time that I didn't like guns and felt like they were icky and bad? Is that what you're taking from my stances?
How about you just answer the question instead of attack the specific terminology? How about I'll be more specific?
Well, the terminology you're using is to say that I'm using some sort of pathos in my argument. I'm saying we can use all this verifiable data from gun control measures around the world to say
you want to restrict rights. Your argument is from a consequentialist analysis. And when I grill you on the data, you basically say, well, we don't really know the data. So where are you getting this consequentialist analysis from other than your fee-fees?
There's specific data within the USA, which it is highly contested whether it is verifiable information or not, especially because as Pondering said multiple times, the Dickey Act has put kind of a damper on our ability to assess these problems.
So where the fuck do you get the authority to restrict people's rights when you don't fucking understand what the consequences will be? It's a shitty consequentialist argument if consequentialism wasn't already fucking trash. You goddamn monster.
I'm looking at your
question. Can I interject and ask a quick question? So, by the way, is my mic okay now?
Yeah, you sound great.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. I appreciate
you sound good.
With
Smooth as a motherfucker, too.
Thank you. So, Fabian, when you say right, and I'm sorry if you guys have already covered this, I apologize. Again, I don't have the context. I came in very late. When you say right, what is a right to you, like intrinsically? Where's the line for that right?
I would say that private property is a right derived from bodily autonomy and freedom from aggression. So negative rights from people infringing upon your bodily autonomy, and because of the historical link associated with property, this includes your property.
Sorry, let me clarify my question. I'm not necessarily asking where the right is coming from. I'm asking you where the line for a right is. So is it something that everyone gets by default, or do we draw boundaries? And if those boundaries exist, where are they?
So I would say that human beings as a species have the right of personhood, regardless of their ability to, I mean, I don't want to get into like into the axioms here too deeply. I'll just simply say that human beings have a right of personhood, and this means the negative right from aggression. And stealing or restricting people's persons or property, such as taking away guns or stopping them from being able to engage in the market freely with voluntary transactions, is an infringement upon their rights.
Great. So it sounds like in there that you did have some qualifiers for those rights, though. So can we agree that there are boundaries for these rights? They're not just simply to everyone. I see Casimir shaking his head, and I want to ask Casimir a question that too here. So we restrict felons from owning firearms in this nation in many cases. Is that infringing upon the right of felons, or is that simply enforcing our law as we know it?
It depends on the felony, but the felon has a the person has the same fundamental right to not be aggressed against until they become an aggressor, and by doing so, until they complete restitution and the retribution from the victim, they have a limitation on what they can claim. So they've lost that through doing these actions that are
They're stopped from arguing for those rights.
So that sounds a bit like an opinion, and I think it's your prerogative to hold it, and that's well and good. But that's
It's a
not
fact.
something which you just expressed.
It's an objective
that is
fact
in
of
our-
logic.
But well, it may be, but it's not in our Constitution, and it sounds like you guys are deriving a lot of these rights from the legality of the Constitution. And again,
Yeah,
if we are
no.
gonna acknowledge-
If you were here
No?
earlier,
Clarify, sorry, go ahead.
I specifically throughout the entire debate said that the founding
Sure, go ahead.
fathers did not go far enough, that they were using utilitarianism and convergence theory to attempt through the scientific method to discover what our natural rights were, and were in the Enlightenment philosophy doing so, and they established liberal democracy. And it's not their fault that things such as the non-aggression principle and argumentation ethics and estoppel as applied to law were not discovered as of yet, that they
So we have a
expected us to
natural right
continue
to
that
firearms.
philosophy.
We have a
With a
natural right to
person
firearms.
and
When he says,
property, which
personal
includes
property.
firearms.
When he
Okay,
says
I
the
want to
word
I'm going to skip to the
natural-
end because my point's
One
running a
moment.
little long to the tooth.
One moment.
Go ahead.
When he says, I want to translate for you the word natural as it's used historically. So there's the normal definition of it is that philosophically, something that natural means that it comes from something in reality that gives you that. It's a realist claim. So, for example, if you can derive something from logic, you would consider it natural potentially. And throughout the history of the use of that term, the founding fathers considered it. Their explanation was that there's a God, and God gives everybody equality from being under God, and from that Christian perspective, they derived the equality.
Casimir, you're derailing me a little bit. It's running a little long because that's not my bigger point. The natural, it doesn't really matter for me here.
Go ahead.
By the way, side note here, I think the whole argument of like having a natural right to firearms in some way is patently absurd. That aside, so my question is, with firearms specifically, is there a point in which you would say that enough harm is coming from them where you would want to restrict them more in a major way? Does that line exist for you?
So absolutely. I am all for restrictions and regulations, voluntary ones.
Where is that line?
This is the line is as much as the individual wants it to be and whom they choose to voluntarily associate want it to be. So, for example, we could look
So
at
as a country, not as an individual. As a country.
No.
So there's not
As
a
a
place where
country-
you would restrict them at all.
I didn't sign any goddamn contract with you for you to restrict upon my rights. However, if I was, I don't know, let's say Amish or a Mennonite or some other form of religious community that was a pacifist, I absolutely could create a covenant community where everyone in our community voluntarily associates and says, we don't like firearms. We don't want firearms here. Now, granted, they might be overrun because it's kind of a dumb idea and they might need to figure out some way of protection. But nevertheless, you can voluntarily restrict them as much as you want. What's different is when you tell me that you have a right because of a ballot box to tell me what I can and can't do with my fucking property, despite the fact that I've harmed no one.
So let me Ben Shapiro you a little bit here. So hypothetically, if we were in a situation where you woke up tomorrow and 500 school shootings happened, right? And in each of those school shootings, 100 children died, and all of them were caused by firearms. You're still not on board as a nation with us saying, let's take a look at our access to firearms.
Can I jump in here because this kind of touches like what Kilo was saying earlier.
No, wait. No, don't derail this. This was horrible.
I'm not going to derail this.
Well, wait, I just want to understand where the line is.
Is this your last question? Hold on. Is this your last question? And so that other people can speak, I'll answer this last question.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
it's really simple. It's really simple. No, absolutely not. There's no fucking line. And here's the thing: the absurdity with the example that you gave. Imagine.
Well, it's meant to be absurd.
No,
it's meant to be.
No. Don't interrupt me. Imagine for a moment, right, that actually happened and the government decided to do nothing. Every mom and parent in America would immediately pull their children out of schools and begin forming homeschooling co-op initiatives and would just break away from the system because of the presumed failure of the state to protect their children. And while those deaths would be a horrible fucking tragedy, I don't know how the fuck they happened. Maybe it was because you instituted too many gun laws and only criminals were able to get into the schools and the children weren't properly protected. But maybe that's why so many gun deaths happen. But regardless, is the idea that people individually, that parents would not form ways to protect their children is insane. It's this knee-jerk reaction for the state to do things that we as individuals. What do you mean they're not now?
We're absolutely not now as a country. So, like, the fact that you guys try to take this moral high ground on this issue. Hold on. So you're trying to take a moral high ground here. We do have a gun violence problem in this country. People are trying to skew the data and misrepresent it. But the reality is there are clear correlations in the data across states that have higher gun regulation laws and higher quality of gun regulation and lower rates of firearm violence and homicide.
Absolutely not true.
Absolutely true. I will send you the source right now.
I can give you the numbers because I know it's not true.
For you to try to sit here and moral grandstand.
I've sat here confused.
People are dying.
Hey, all of you, stop. We can't hear you when you talk over each other. Finish quickly, concisely, and then what's your name, sir? The Sovereign can respond.
Yep.
Finish.
Yep.
The Sovereign. That's where we go. Go.
Yep. So the end point of morality is human life. When people start dying, nothing really gets too much worse than that at a mass scale. We are having people die. Your rights, as you're calling them, are not worth more than the lives of our children.
Can you stop
and
your
the incredibly high
please?
No. I got this real quick. So no, hold on, real quick.
I gave Sovereign the chance here. I gave Sovereign the chance. So let's start Sovereign.
But it's directed and attacking me. It's directed and attacking me. I'll be very quick because it's directed and attacking me. So the end point is human life. You will justify any violation of people's rights because human life is more important than their suffering or their rights being denied. So I have this very simple question to you. When a criminal holds you hostage and is using weapons and force and killing other people, right? And they say to you, I'll stop so long as you rape this 4-year-old boy. How long are you going to rape this 4-year-old boy to stop the violence? Because the end point is the human life. So you have to, by your logic, accept that you're going to rape the 4-year-old boy over and over and over again, so long as the criminal that is holding you hostage is killing people. How long are you going to do it before you decide to off yourself and become just one more point in the data statistics that gets skewed towards guns being suicides and not actual murders?
Yeah, so the answer is you can try to philosophy brain it all you want to the furthest possible.
The answer is
hold
you can't fucking answer it.
You gotta let me answer. You gotta let me answer. So the reality is when I say a human life, that's not simply just dead or alive, right? There's more that goes into it than that. There absolutely is. But when you die, that is a finality, right? Like that's just it. That's an endpoint. And
Wait, do
so
you
we
make
are
those
having
same arguments
children
for
die.
abortion?
This is hold on. We
let's
are
not
not
go down that
faced
road.
with a choice. We are not faced with a choice of having to like sexually assault children or have children die from gun violence. That's not the choice here. So for you to try to inflate it as that, it doesn't apply. I don't have to philosophy brain
man,
it
No,
to
no,
the most
I just
Wait,
turn your
he was
bullshit
gra-
logic off.
he was grandstanding, right? And as soon as this grandstanding with using this value of life above everything else was turned against him, he started
Obviously,
saying,
no,
"Oh,
Casimir.
No,
Obviously,
you
there's
took
a
what he said
context.
too
now
literally.
now
There's
it
a
becomes
context.
nuanced. Now it becomes nuanced. However, your nuance means excluding all the major
Casimir, the nuance is
all the
implied in
major
that we're talking about gun
genocides,
violence right now.
the gun
Okay,
violence by
we're not
government
talking about whether or
should-
not to sexually
the
assault
reason
children.
why
It's silly.
you should calm
Nuance,
down,
bro.
you should relax,
I'm
and
so
you
much
should
better than
open
you, but
your
now
ears.
nuance.
No one's worked up.
You should open your ears and listen. There is currently a genocide in Sudan that was stopped because people received weapons and those people opposed. There were two ethnic groups fighting each other.
We're not in
and one of
Sudan.
them was getting murdered by the government.
Hold on.
That was one genocide. There was also a genocide in Rwanda. So
Wick,
my people have a saying. It's called
we got to go
never
around. We
again.
got to get
And our
to
data.
We do.
Sovereign, we got
we got to
do.
get to
We got a lot
Anja
of
and then
people.
Isaac and then Sovereign.
Okay, well, we got Sovereign first. Sovereign's the first one that goes because I already said he can go, but Fabian took his spot,
we'll
right?
give
So he
Sovereign a turn.
aggressed upon you and took your
All
spot.
right.
Okay,
At one
so
point, I'll prove that this guy is doing Holocaust denial right now on stream with
Hold
his
on.
cherry picking of data.
Sovereign, go on. We all got things we got to say on this.
All right, Sovereign. I
Yeah,
assume you're here for me. What's up, man?
No, I'm not actually. I'm here for falsers.
Great.
Whatever issue I have with you, I'll take it with you in chat later. So, falsers, you're patently wrong about the correlation that you're trying to make between gun access, gun ownership rates, and gun laws, and correlation to gun homicide rates. It's not consistent across states at all. If you look at states like New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, all of those have incredibly lax gun laws, and they're always at the bottom of gun homicides every fucking year. And then you look at states like
FSP,
Maryland
baby.
or Illinois. Delaware, California, states like that, they all have significantly higher gun homicides per capita. It has nothing to do with access, ownership, or laws. It's socioeconomic. It's always been socioeconomic. That's why states like Louisiana that technically have stricter laws than places like New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine, Massachusetts, all of them always have much higher gun homicide rates. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Great. Well, I'm glad you say that because the CDC disagrees with you. I'm looking at it as we speak. And there is a geographical correlation where gun violence and gun rates per capita are much higher in the Southeast right now, where gun regulation is much weaker.
In the
You
Southeast,
claim California. You claim California is amongst the top. Let's look at where
I
it
know
is.
what you're talking about again. So it let me again interrupt you to correct you on not knowing what the fuck you're talking about.
Go
So
ahead,
the
go ahead.
CDC data that you're citing, we don't even need to use it because we can look at gun homicides per state. We can look at states. The reason you're saying the Southeast and trying to say the Southeast has like less strict gun laws or whatever. South Carolina has stricter gun laws than fucking Vermont. South Carolina has stricter gun laws than New Hampshire. You don't know what you're talking about. This is something that gets repeated by a lot of gun control people because they don't understand how like socioeconomically correlated it is. And throughout this entire conversation, for some reason, the gun control people have been conflating method with causality the entire time. I do statistics for a living. The entire time, even in the hypothetical that you gave, you said, "Oh, if 500 schools were shot up and the cause was guns." The cause wouldn't be guns. That's the method. You don't understand the difference.
Sav, are
Well,
you
it's
saying
hypothetical.
wait, Sav, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
so most of the information that I come across does indicate that states who have more lax gun laws tend to have higher rates of gun deaths. Are you saying that that's tautological? Is that your point?
What I'm saying is that gun homicides do not correlate in the same way and not proportionally in any way.
If
And
you
there's
segregate
states
the
with-
suicid's.
Yeah, I don't
is what
care.
you're saying.
So yeah,
No, I'm
you're
asking.
talking about-
That's what I'm asking you.
No, we're specifically talking about gun homicides.
Okay.
Because you don't regulate somebody's ability to own something based on what somebody else wants to do to themselves, except for drugs and guns for some reason.
No, I'm talking about firearm
sometimes
deaths.
we
to be clear.
absolutely do. So I don't understand why we can segregate suicides from this, right? If
We
suicide
segregate them
deaths when it
because-
comes to guns absolutely count. Why do they not?
Can I jump in there on that?
Wait.
If we're going to include
Yeah,
suicides,
go
we have
ahead.
to include like mass genocides as well, because we keep talking about countries with some of these strictest gun laws. Let's
Sure,
talk about
let's segregate in the
China.
last 20 years.
I mean,
I'm
China's
fine with
killed
that,
millions.
right?
I mean, yeah, and I really,
Why
we can really
20
talk
years,
about
not
that, whatever
100?
metric.
Even
whatever
if
metric
we
you want.
even if we say that other countries are worse, we still have a problem, don't we?
I mean, I'm not arguing there's not a problem, but this kind of comes back to why I'm saying that is the issue with the guns fundamentally is that yeah,
You
it's
said there
surprising to me in
wasn't a
businesses.
problem.
I mean, I don't think there is a problem personally, but I'm saying hypothetically, if we're going to admit there's a problem, let's
So
just
you
say
don't
there
think
is.
there's a problem? Okay. Okay.
The point that I'm making is that it doesn't matter if there's a problem or not. The problem is if they come and take the guns because the guns are designed for the people to defend themselves against the government and to defend themselves in general. That's what the guns are for. These things all suck that y'all are talking about. But the minute we start taking them away, it's been proven time and time again, mass genocide occurs. And for y'all to sit here and try to dismiss that is outrageous and just not based in history.
And you can look at this. You can look at the example of this right now. Everybody who's in chat who's observing this debate, I can't link it here, and nobody that's streaming can show you this because it is, not safe for work, most likely not safe for Twitch. But you should type something like Belarus protests and then beatings, and you will see that there is video after video showing brutal suppression of protesters by a regime that manipulated, did something to their voting system that elected a dictator, basically the last dictator in Europe. And people spent 6 months protesting. And
are you saying there's been a genocide in Britain since they've brought their gun laws down? Has there been a genocide or a Holocaust in Britain since they brought their gun laws down?
I'm saying that you will cherry pick a country that didn't have.
Gibbs said
yes,
that
Britain,
in every country.
Yes,
Britain. You were saying there's a genocide in Great Britain taking place.
World War II, Britain in its policy allowed the Holocaust. Did not.
I'm talking about 20 years.
The Holocaust when it was bombing Germany and the bombers were flying over
20 years.
where people were getting killed.
Keep it to
yes,
keep it to my lifetime.
Keep
it to 50 years. Let's keep it to the last 50 years.
No. You won't keep it to anything.
I'm talking Britain specifically because you said every country.
The current genocide in Sudan that stopped by private ownership of guns by militias. I mentioned Rwanda, which could have been stopped by private ownership of guns by the people who were genocided there. I could mention the genocide in Lebanon, where the Christians were there, were genocided, were massacred, and could only defend themselves because they had some guns. In every country where you have people that are disarmed and there's any type of ethnic or cultural.
Casimir, are you saying right now? Stop, Casimir. I'm going to challenge you directly to this right now. Then I want other people to get in here, but I want you to answer this question. If we got rid of guns or restricted guns in America, right? If we change the Second Amendment so that there were tighter restrictions on gun laws, are you saying that there would be a genocide in America?
I'm saying that
yes or no.
Yes, we would be on the path.
Yes, we would be genocide. Okay, I just want to get that on record. That's your claim.
Immediately.
I have evidence for this. Yes,
immediately.
I want to
when did you stop beating your wife, Wick?
Please.
Wick, when did you stop beating your wife? Yes or no?
No, me. I have evidence.
When did you stop beating your wife, Wick?
Yelling
stop. I have evidence.
No, your
I have evidence.
Hey,
Wick.
That have totally different socio-political scenarios
Hey, Wick.
than we have in America.
I haven't seen you in like a long time, bro.
We had scenarios.
Yeah.
Where
So like, whenever you get a minute,
were attacked by
to
the
interrupt
US
this,
government.
just let me know.
We had scenarios, including right now. Now you don't believe because he made it look like my point is preposterous, and then multiple people silenced me. So let's look at the evidence.
Multiple people silenced you.
Casimir, you've been anything but silent.
In 2020, during the lockdowns, people with guns marched into a government building and prevented harsher lockdowns from occurring. So it already indicates to you that the government was willing to deprive people of one fundamental right that they have, which is the right to provide for their family, and people decided that they are not going to have it, even though they were a local minority. This is one.
That's silly.
Whereas people who are unarmed, like certain Black Lives Matter protesters, are beaten by police systematically. Like Occupy Wall Street was beaten by police systematically. Everybody saw the police officers come in front of a row of people and spray them in the eyes with a gas.
Can we take a break from the Casimir show for like 5 minutes?
I want to get other people in here. I want to get other people in here.
If you didn't silence me, I would have said those things immediately.
I'm sure you will get a chance later to speak more. I promise you will get a chance later to speak more. But I promise you, if I wanted to silence you, I'd just do this, buddy. If I wanted to silence you, I'd just do that. That's what I would do. Okay, I would mute you, right? And that's what I would do. I'm not trying to silence you. I'm just saying that there's 12 people on this. Well, no, sorry, math. 10 people on this panel that need to talk. I think your point's a little preposterous. I think that like equating getting sprayed and pepper sprayed in the eyes, well, that's probably not a good idea. And lockdowns also not, I wasn't a big fan of all of the lockdowns, right? That's not genocide. Let's stop conflating. Critical thinking. It's been a while. I want to give you a chance. You haven't had a chance to speak yet. I understand everyone was. I see you too, Isaac. I see you too.
Gibbs and I both raised
Wick,
our
that
hands
was
before he was even in here.
No, it's fine. I've talked a lot.
Wick, that was
I can wait.
that was such a great adult way to say what I'm about to say for the learning impaired out there, right? Because I'm gonna just let everybody know, right? Wick was saying, "Shut the fuck up." Okay, just so we're clear. Okay. Anyway, that said, Wick, I haven't seen you in a long time, man. Last time I seen you, you were just kind of getting started out. I see now you kind of making a name for yourself. I see you out here putting on a show, pretty regular. See you got a pretty good sized audience. So, I can see the work that you've been putting in, and I recognize that. So,
Appreciate that.
just let you know, I see you, bro. You know what I
Well,
mean?
you got any thoughts on the topic at hand so we can engage with it?
Well, let's see. Let's see, what's his name? Falsers. Like I kind of memed in a joke. His logic would fall apart with the argument of abortion, right? He wouldn't have the same consideration, even though it'd be along the exact same lines. But as far as gun control is concerned, the only people that ever advocate for gun control are dictators. Somebody that wants to control someone else. That's true in government. That's true in relationships. If you have a partner and they have, said, "Oh, I'm taking your gun away from you," that's a big fucking red flag. You better keep a hold of your gun. I don't give a fuck who it is, right? Because at the end of the day, God said that everybody
things.
understands it to be the meek shall inherit the earth, and that meek is supposed to be somehow weak. Now, anybody else has heard Jordan Peters' explanation of meek and how it's differently seen as those that have their swords sheathed but are ready to use them, right? Which I would say is much more accurate to the way that God would have his people be ready. Self-defense is a part of that. He didn't say, "Hey, just lay over and take it from everybody," but he didn't say,
You guys,
"Go
okay.
pick the fight." So, in this instance, your legislation at the federal level, I will always put down. Doesn't matter.
You're
But,
also putting words in Falser's mouth, by the way.
Where it's
I'm
like,
just
why are we having gun violence? And it's because young men aren't cleaning their room. And that's something to think about. Because
Right.
if you clean your room and you get rid of the chaos, you get rid of the guns.
That's right. So remember,
Very good.
okay,
Sorry, guys.
that
Jesus.
it doesn't matter how many laws you put on the books. Criminals are going to have their guns. And if you want to have a meaningful conversation about reducing gun violence, then you need to have a meaningful conversation about increasing gun education. And until you're ready to have that one, we're going to continue to have dumbass politicians try to tell everybody that an AR-15 is an assault rifle, right? When all it is a semi-automatic rifle. Period. And that's how
No one
these things
said
are
anything
classified.
close to that on this entire panel.
I don't give a fuck if anybody said it. I just introducing new shit.
You're
Fucking
combating
using the
ideas that
conversation.
have not been presented here today.
People
shit.
trying to pay me money.
Welcome
People
to
are trying to pay me
CTV.
money.
I'm now here.
People are trying to pay me money, right? And gang, this is open panel, so if you want to pay me money, I will mute a motherfucker. I will kick them off, but you got to pay me more than you just did. So 500 more bits to mute someone for let's say 5 minutes, and if you give me 5,000 bits, I'll kick them off. Cool. Let's do this. Okay. I want to respond to that point, gang. I want more people in. I want to give Isaac a chance here. Isaac hasn't had a chance. He's had his hand up. He's been ready to talk. He hasn't got a chance to talk. Now's your time to shine, buddy. Impress us.
I want to say Gibbs had his hand up at the same time. Do you have a
I don't care. Go ahead.
Okay,
I'm
Jesus,
giving it to you.
I have some statistics that I found. So about 45 minutes ago, somebody, I believe it was Scott, actually brought up stolen firearms being used primarily in committing murders, basically. So let's see. In 2019, there was 10,258 firearm murders, not including
And they have paid me
suicides.
to mute you for 5 minutes, CTV. Sorry, buddy. I love you, but I love money more. So
Rest in peace. And then the number of recovered firearms that were either stolen or missing in 2019 was 2,273. So that's still roughly 75% of firearm murders that were committed by firearms that had a rightful owner. Or, well, no, that's not exactly true. They could have just been unaccounted for.
What's your point?
Well,
that you were wrong.
He's refuting
You haven't refuted anything other. The only thing you've said is data on how many guns were found that were illegal
Can I make a comment on the data
in the commission
very
of these
quickly?
crimes.
So you're
I'll be
positing that
concise here, too.
7,500 guns just haven't been found yet.
Let me see your data. Your data is based off of. So the argument that you're making is that the studies that state that the majority of gang violence and crimes are committed by illegal firearms is untrue because of the amount of cases in which the police have investigated and discovered the firearm in question. And so you're saying any other death must automatically fall into the category of legally obtained firearm, regardless
Scott,
of whether or not the police it solved the murder.
But if they haven't found the firearm, then how can we say that the study that was determining that the firearm was illegal? How can we give credence to that one?
Right. Well, I mean, the same way that polling data works, right? Like when you do a poll, you don't ask every American, and let's say if you're going to do a poll on like Virginia, right? And like whose Virginia citizens are going to vote for. You don't ask every single solitary citizen in the state of Virginia. What you do is you're extrapolating, right?
Yeah.
A lot of crimes go unsolved, right? I don't know if you've ever watched the first 48, right? But like, Tom Segura has a nice bit about it where it's Wednesday and they go, what about that? What are we doing today? Oh, nothing. And he goes, what about that murder on Monday? It's like, oh, it's Wednesday. We're not going to solve that shit. Like there's a lot of unsolved murders and cases and a lot of unrecovered firearms. The data is not looking at every firearm and then assuming every other murder must fall into the category of legal firearm. They're looking at, of the murders that we solve, what are the percentages that are done with legally owned firearms? What are the percentages that are done with illegal firearms?
Yes. It just sounds like this is inconclusive, which is what I was talking about earlier. It's why I kind of struggle to go down this avenue of conversation. So like Isaac, even though that totally supports my perspective on it, it's really hard to have this conversation when we kind of don't really know either way.
But your perspective is that your perspective is that you know enough to be able to make a consequential analysis to say that the moral good is to restrict people's rights in order to have a more positive outcome. And every time we bring up statistics, there's counter statistics and there's different arguments from different sides. And you eventually cope and say,
there's really
well,
not.
we don't
There's
really
really
know.
not.
And
You guys are
we
playing
don't
mental
really know.
gymnastics with the data. There's so much
How are we
mental
playing mental
gymnastics with the data here.
gymnastics?
There's
mental gymnastics am I playing?
there's clear data from the CDC. There's like health data. There's
Please
data
bring up the
from
CDC
WHO.
data. Please bring. I know what CDC data you're talking about, and I want you to bring it up.
Let me finish my point.
You
Let me finish my
literally
point. You guys aren't
accidentally
psychic. You're
showed
not
the
psychic.
CDC
Let me-
data behind you.
It wasn't accidental.
Showed,
I did it on purpose. It was a
and it
background.
showed South Carolina, which has very strict gun control laws, as the reddest motherfucker in the whole area. You
Not only
literally
that,
debunked your own point accidentally behind you.
It is not the strictest gun control laws. God, can I finish a fucking point before you guys
You've been
dogpile?
talking more than I have, so I'm going to talk.
Let me just finish my point, and then you can respond. Jesus Christ!
If you look at that same chart that you had on
the
your sheet,
CDC does disagree with you about
chart,
the
it
of the
doesn't.
South
It
Carolina
does.
laws.
That's what I'm telling you. So if you look at the chart,
If we're just not going to talk over each other.
Isaac, thank you for the sub. You're gonna need a little more than that to kick Gibbs off, though.
No, I want to let him talk.
Hey, Wick, Wick,
Oh,
I gotta call my dad. I've been here a long time.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank
I
everybody for the
appreciate you
time.
being here.
Look, I get it. You know, the statistics, one way or the other. He says I'm doing mental gymnastics. I understand. You know, he has data that he believes, you know, totally
You
supports
don't.
his
You would
conclusion.
if you let me
I get
explain it
that,
for more than 10
and
seconds.
I understand. You know, no, I get it. You know, well, you know, I'll just leave with this little bit. If anybody here is retarded enough to still believe the CDC after what they've been saying and are currently saying and lying on Congress, after doctors that have been silenced over and over again have been proving the bullshit narratives that they put out wrong over and over and over again, but now you want to believe them on gun control, even though your own data is debunking you in your imagery, I don't know what to tell you. You're a lost cause, or maybe you're just doing mental gymnastics. Have a great evening, guys.
Fabian, real quick.
Bye. Oh.
What?
Wick,
Try to leave.
give me
I gotta call my
30
dad.
seconds here for the love
It's
of
not
God.
9:08. I told him I call him
30
at 9.
seconds
No,
to get my fucking point out.
It's good to see you, bro.
Okay,
It's
cool.
good to see you too.